Four sisters stood chained on an auction block in the Montana heat, while drunk men bid on their bodies like cattle. Their own uncle had sold them. The youngest was 19. The oldest couldn't stop shaking. They were about to be separated forever, sold to minors, gamblers, men who saw women as property. Then a scarred giant stepped forward and silenced the entire crowd with two words: all four. Nobody knew if he was their salvation or something worse. This is the story of how broken people built a family when the world said they didn't deserve one. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The dust tasted like copper and shame. Evelyn Mercer had memorized every crack in the wooden platform beneath her feet during the past hour. Anything to avoid looking at the faces below. The leering grins, the calculating eyes, the hands that gestured at her body like she was a mare being evaluated for breeding stock. Beside her, Clara's fingers dug into her arm hard enough to bruise. On her other side, Daisy was praying under her breath, and Wren, sweet Wren who still cried when she stepped on wildflowers, was shaking so badly her teeth chattered despite the July heat. "Lot 17," the auctioneer's voice cracked across the cattle yard like a whip. "4 prime specimens from the Pike estate. Good strong backs, young enough to bear children, old enough to know their place." Laughter erupted from the crowd. Evelyn's jaw clenched so hard she thought her teeth might crack. Prime specimens. Her father had been dead 6 weeks. 6 weeks since cholera had taken him in the night, and 5 since their Uncle Gideon had arrived with a land deed their father supposedly signed over before he died. A deed none of them had ever seen. A deed that somehow gave Gideon Pike everything: the farm, the livestock, even the furniture their mother had carved by hand before consumption took her. 3 weeks since Gideon had looked at them across the kitchen table and said, "Can't afford to feed 4 useless mouths. You'll fetch a better price than the furniture anyway." "Look at the big one," someone shouted. "She could pull a plow herself." More laughter. Evelyn kept her eyes on the mountains in the distance. The Bitterroots rose up beyond the valley like jagged teeth against the sky. She'd dreamed of disappearing into those mountains since she was a girl. Now she'd never get the chance. "What about the small one?" another voice called. "She looks like she might break in half." "Might be fun finding out," the crowd roared. Evelyn felt Wren flinch. She shifted slightly, placing herself between her youngest sister and the worst of the crowd. It was all she could do now. All she'd ever been able to do: stand between her sisters and the world's cruelty and pretend she was strong enough to stop it. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Now, gentlemen, let's start the bidding proper. I'll take offers individually or as a group, though I suspect most of you want to pick and choose your $50 for the blonde." A stocky man in a miner's clothes stepped forward, the little one with the scared eyes. Wren made a sound like a wounded animal. "We got 50. Any advance on 50? 75 for the tall one." Another man, this one wearing a suit that had seen better days, probably owned one of the saloons in Silver Creek. "She's got the look of someone who won't take sass from drunks." Evelyn's vision blurred. This was actually happening. They were actually going to be separated, sold to different men, scattered across the territory like seeds in a windstorm. 60 for the brown-haired one, a logger with arms like tree trunks jabbed his finger at Clara. "I need someone who can keep books. She looks smart enough." "Smart ones cause trouble," someone warned. "Not if you break them in proper." Clara's grip on Evelyn's arm tightened until it felt like bone grinding against bone. The bidding continued. Numbers climbed. Evelyn stopped listening to the amounts and started memorizing faces instead. If they were separated, maybe she could find her sisters again someday. Maybe she could track down the men who bought them, buy them back somehow, save them from whatever fresh hell waited beyond this moment. 125 for all 4. Their uncle's voice cut through the chaos. Gideon Pike stood at the edge of the platform, counting money with the satisfied air of a man who'd just made an excellent investment. "That's 125 total, gentlemen. Think of the value. 4 women for the price of 2. And they come with basic skills: cooking, cleaning, sewing. The blonde even paints pretty pictures." "Nobody wants paintings in a mining camp, Gideon." "Then use her for something else." Gideon's grin was sharp enough to draw blood. "Point is, they're versatile and desperate enough not to run. 150 for the tall one and the blonde together. 175 for the lot. 200. The numbers kept climbing. Evelyn felt something breaking inside her chest, not her heart that had shattered weeks ago. Something else. Something that had kept her standing upright through her father's death and Gideon's theft, and the slow realization that the law wouldn't help them because women didn't own property, and unmarried women were property themselves. Hope, maybe. Whatever pathetic scrap of hope she'd been clinging to. 250. The auctioneer's voice rose with excitement. We're at 250 for the complete set. Any advance? Going once? 500. The entire yard went silent. Evelyn's head snapped up. She couldn't help it. A man stood at the back of the crowd, except calling him a man felt inadequate. He was enormous, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. Dark hair fell past his collar. Scars traced white lines across his knuckles and up the left side of his neck, disappearing into his beard. He wore simple rancher's clothes, but there was nothing simple about the way every man in the yard had stepped back when he spoke. The auctioneer cleared his throat. I'm sorry, did you say? $500. The giant's voice was quiet, but it carried across the yard like distant thunder. For all four, together, no separation. Gideon Pike's face went red. Now hold on, Blackthorn. You got a problem with my money, Pike? The way Gideon's mouth snapped shut told Evelyn everything she needed to know about who this Blackthorn was. Someone even her uncle feared. 500 is mighty generous, the auctioneer said carefully. But some of these other gentlemen might want to. I wasn't asking permission. Blackthorn's gray eyes swept across the crowd. I made an offer. Take it or I leave and your auction falls apart when every man here realizes he could have had an easy sale if he hadn't gotten greedy. The silence stretched. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. A man near the front spoke up. What do you need 4 women for, Blackthorn? Trying to start a harem up in those mountains? The giant's expression didn't change. What I do on my land is my business. You want to make it yours, Wilson? You want to ride up to my ranch and ask me questions about my household? Wilson shut up fast. 500, Blackthorn repeated. Cash. Right now. And I'm taking them today. The auctioneer looked at Gideon, who looked like he'd swallowed broken glass but finally nodded. Sold. 4 Pike sisters to Rowan Blackthorn for $500. The crowd erupted in muttering. Some men looked angry at losing their chance. Others looked relieved they didn't have to compete with whatever Blackthorn was. A few looked at the sisters with something almost like pity. Evelyn's legs had stopped working. She stood frozen on the platform while the giant, Rowan Blackthorn, counted out money into Gideon's greedy hands. Her uncle didn't even look at them, just pocketed the cash and walked away. Blackthorn turned to face them. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The scars on his neck continued up his jaw to his left temple. His hands were massive, calloused from hard work. But his eyes weren't cruel. They were careful, evaluating, but not the way the other men had evaluated them. Can you walk? He asked. It took Evelyn a moment to realize he was talking to her. What? Can you and your sisters walk, or do I need to get a wagon? We can walk. Her voice came out steady. She had no idea how. Good. My horse is at the livery. We leave in 10 minutes. He glanced at the 3 sisters still huddled behind Evelyn. Any of you injured? Sick? They shook their heads mutely. All right. Blackthorn pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Evelyn. That's the bill of sale. Keep it with you. Anyone asks questions, you show them that. Understand? Evelyn took the paper with numb fingers. It was official, signed by the auctioneer and witnessed by 2 men whose names she didn't recognize. 4 women sold to Rowan Blackthorn for $500, transferred ownership July 15th, 1885. Transferred ownership. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. Blackthorn raised an eyebrow. Why what? Why all 4 of us? Why together? Evelyn's hands were shaking now. You could have bought just one. Saved yourself money. For a long moment, Blackthorn didn't answer. Then he said, because nobody deserves to lose their family twice in one summer. He turned and walked away, heading toward the livery stable. The sisters stood on the platform in stunned silence. Is he... Wren's voice was barely a whisper. Is he better or worse? I don't know, Evelyn admitted, but we're together. That's something. What if he's a monster? Clara asked. Daisy surprised them all by speaking. He can't be worse than Uncle Gideon. It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but it was enough to get them moving. They climbed down from the platform on shaking legs. The crowd had mostly dispersed, though a few men lingered to watch them go. One spat tobacco juice in their direction. Another made a crude gesture. Evelyn ignored them all and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The livery stable was a squat building at the edge of the cattle yard. Blackthorn was inside, saddling an enormous black stallion that looked mean enough to match its owner. There were 3 other horses waiting, already saddled. "Any of you know how to ride?" Blackthorn asked without looking up. "I can," Evelyn said. "Clara can. Daisy and Wren are learning." "Then Evelyn and Clara take their own horses. Daisy rides with me. Wren," he glanced at the youngest sister, who looked ready to bolt. "You comfortable riding alone if I lead your horse?" Wren nodded hesitantly. "Good enough." Blackthorn finished with his stallion and moved to check the other saddles. "We've got a hard ride ahead. 3 days to my ranch if the weather holds. You need anything from town before we go?" "We don't have anything in town," Evelyn said flatly. "Gideon sold it all." Blackthorn's jaw tightened, but he just nodded. "Then we leave now. There's a general store 2 hours up the trail. We'll stop there for supplies." He helped Daisy up onto his horse first, then Wren onto a smaller mare. The girl looked terrified, but she didn't cry. Evelyn felt a surge of pride. Whatever happened next, her sisters were fighters. She swung up onto her own horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, and Clara mounted beside her. Blackthorn climbed up behind Daisy and gathered his reins. "Stay close," he said. "Don't wander off the trail. There's bears in these mountains and they don't care if you're lost." Then he kicked his horse forward and they were moving. Evelyn risked one look back at Silver Creek as they rode out. The town looked smaller already, less significant. The cattle yard was empty now, just dust and manure and the memory of men bidding on human beings like they were furniture. She turned forward and didn't look back again. They rode in silence for the first hour. The trail climbed steadily into the foothills, leaving the valley heat behind. Pine trees crowded in on both sides, thick enough to block out most of the sun. The air smelled like sap and earth, and something wild that Evelyn couldn't name. Ahead of them, Blackthorn rode with easy confidence, one hand on the reins and the other steadying Daisy on the saddle in front of him. He hadn't said a word since they left town. Clara guided her horse up beside Evelyn's. "This is insane," she whispered. "I know. We just rode off into the wilderness with a complete stranger." "I know. He could murder us, bury us in these woods, and nobody would ever find the bodies." "Clara," Evelyn kept her voice low. "I know. But what were our other options?" Her sister went quiet. The truth was there hadn't been options. Stay on that platform and get separated. Run and starve in the wilderness. Throw themselves on the mercy of a town that had watched them get sold without lifting a finger to help. At least this way they were together. The general store appeared exactly when Blackthorn had said it would. A weathered building at a crossroads with a hand-painted sign that read Mackey's Supplies. Blackthorn dismounted and helped Daisy down, then turned to the rest of them. "I'm buying trail food and bedrolls," he said. "You need anything specific? Speak up now." "We don't have money," Evelyn said. "Didn't ask if you had money. Asked if you needed anything." The sisters exchanged glances. "Decent shoes," Clara said finally. "These won't last another day of riding." "Women's clothes that aren't torn," Daisy added quietly. Blackthorn nodded and headed inside. The sisters dismounted and stood awkwardly by the horses, not sure if they were supposed to follow. A woman emerged from the store, short, round, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes. She looked the sisters up and down, then called over her shoulder, "Blackthorn! These the girls everyone's talking about?" "Don't start, Mackey." "Wasn't starting anything, just asking." The woman, presumably Mrs. Mackey, turned back to the sisters. "You girls look half-starved. When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning," Wren said softly. Mrs. Mackey's expression darkened. She disappeared into the store and returned with a basket of bread and dried meat. "Here, eat, and don't you dare try to pay me." They ate standing up, too hungry to care about manners. The bread was fresh enough to still be warm. The meat was salty and tough, but tasted better than anything Evelyn had eaten in weeks. Blackthorn emerged carrying an armload of supplies. He dumped it all on the porch. Bedrolls, saddlebags, wrapped packages that looked like food. Mrs. Mackey vanished inside again and came back with boots and simple riding clothes. "Try these on," she told the sisters. "If they don't fit, I've got other sizes." The boots fit well enough. The clothes were practical. Canvas pants and cotton shirts, nothing fancy but infinitely better than the torn dresses they'd been wearing. Mrs. Mackey even threw in wool socks and leather gloves. "How much do I owe you?" Blackthorn asked. $40 for the supplies. The clothes are free." Mackey, "Oh, I said they're free, Blackthorn. Don't argue with me." She turned to the sisters. "You girls run into trouble up at his ranch. You come find me. Understand?" Evelyn didn't know what to say. It was the first genuine kindness a stranger had shown them in months. "Thank you," she managed. Mrs. Mackey just nodded and headed back inside. They redistributed the supplies among the horses and mounted up again. This time the riding was easier. The new boots made a difference, and having food in their stomachs helped. The trail continued climbing, winding deeper into the mountains. As the sun started sinking toward the horizon, Blackthorn called a halt near a creek. "We camp here tonight. There's a clearing just off the trail." The clearing was small but sheltered, surrounded by massive pines. Blackthorn unsaddled the horses and got them watered while the sisters stood around uselessly, unsure what they were supposed to do. "You know how to make a fire?" Blackthorn asked Evelyn. "Yes." "Then make one. I'll hunt something for dinner." He disappeared into the woods before she could respond. Clara found dry wood while Evelyn got the fire going. Daisy filled canteens at the creek. Wren unrolled the bedrolls and arranged them around the fire. Nobody spoke much. They were too exhausted and too uncertain. Blackthorn returned 20 minutes later with 2 rabbits, already gutted and skinned. He rigged up a spit over the fire and set them roasting, then sat down on a log and started cleaning his knife. The silence stretched. Finally, Clara broke it. "How far is your ranch?" "2 more days if the weather holds." Blackthorn didn't look up from his knife. "3 if it rains." "What's it like?" "Isolated?" That's not an answer. Blackthorn glanced up. His expression was unreadable. "It's a working cattle ranch in the Bitterroot Valley. Main house, barn, stable, couple of outbuildings. About 3,000 acres, most of it grazing land. I run about 200 head of cattle and some horses. In winter, the snow gets deep enough to bury a man. In summer, the heat will kill you if you're not careful. It's hard work, and it's lonely, and it's mine." "Do you have family there?" Daisy asked. Something shifted in Blackthorn's face. "No." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Then why," Wren started, "why did I buy 4 women I don't need?" Blackthorn turned the rabbits on the spit. "That what you're asking?" Wren nodded. "Because I could." He met her eyes. "Because I had the money, and you needed help, and nobody else was going to do it." "Good enough answer?" "No," Evelyn said. Blackthorn raised an eyebrow. "No?" "No." She kept her voice steady. "Nobody spends $500 out of charity. You want something from us. I'd rather know what it is now than find out later." For a long moment, Blackthorn just looked at her. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible beneath his beard, but it softened his whole face. "You're smart," he said. "That's good. You'll need that." "You didn't answer the question." "No, I didn't." He pulled the rabbits off the fire and started cutting them into portions. "Truth is, I don't know what I want from you. I saw you standing on that platform, and I saw your uncle counting money, and I saw men looking at you like you were cattle. And I thought about my wife and daughter and how nobody came when they needed help. So I came for you, that's all." "Your wife and daughter?" Clara asked carefully. Blackthorn's expression went cold. "Are dead. Don't ask about them again." The conversation died. They ate in silence. The rabbit was tough and under-seasoned, but better than nothing. Afterward, Blackthorn banked the fire and retreated to his bedroll on the far side of the clearing. The sisters huddled together on the other side. "He's hiding something," Clara whispered. "Everyone's hiding something," Evelyn whispered back. "Question is whether it's dangerous." "He could have hurt us by now if he wanted to," Daisy pointed out. "Could still hurt us later," Wren said. Evelyn looked across the fire at Blackthorn's motionless form. "We stay alert, we watch him, and if he makes a move, we run." "Where?" Clara asked. "We're 3 days from anywhere." Evelyn didn't have an answer for that. They fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and the dying crackle of the fire. Shit dance. The second day's ride was harder. The trail grew steeper, winding up into true mountains now. The horses struggled with the grade. Evelyn's legs ached from gripping the saddle, and she could see Wren struggling to stay upright. Around midday, Blackthorn called a halt near a waterfall that thundered down a cliff face. They watered the horses and ate jerky and hard biscuits from the supplies. How much farther? Evelyn asked. We're making good time. Should reach the ranch by tomorrow afternoon. Blackthorn studied the sky. Weather's holding. That's lucky. Lucky, Clara muttered. Blackthorn glanced at her. Something on your mind? Just wondering what we're riding toward. A roof, food, work. He took a drink from his canteen. Safety, if you're willing to earn it. Safety from what? From men who think they own you. From winters that kill unprepared people. From going hungry. His gray eyes were direct. From whatever comes next. And what do we owe you for this safety? Evelyn asked. Honest work, nothing more. Men don't buy women for honest work. Then I guess I'm not most men. Blackthorn stood up. We should keep moving. Sun'll be down in 5 hours. They rode on. The conversation had shaken something loose, though. As they traveled, Blackthorn started talking more, pointing out landmarks, warning them about dangerous animals, explaining which plants were edible and which would kill them. It wasn't friendly exactly, but it was less hostile. By the time they made camp that night, the sisters had learned that Blackthorn had been ranching alone for almost 20 years, that he rarely came to town, that his nearest neighbor was a 3-hour ride away, that he'd built most of his ranch buildings with his own hands, and that he'd lost his wife and daughter to a fire that swept through the valley before anyone could ride for help. He didn't offer that last detail. Daisy pulled it out of him with careful questions while she helped prepare dinner. Blackthorn answered reluctantly, his voice flat, his eyes distant. How long ago? Daisy asked gently. Long enough that it shouldn't matter anymore. Blackthorn stood abruptly. I'm checking the horses. He disappeared into the darkness beyond the firelight. He's broken, Wren said softly. We're all broken, Evelyn replied. Doesn't mean we're not dangerous. But she was starting to think maybe Blackthorn wasn't dangerous. Not to them, anyway. Damaged, yes. Carrying grief like stones in his pockets, but not cruel, not twisted, just alone. That night, Evelyn lay awake watching stars appear between the pine branches. Beside her, her sisters slept restlessly. Across the fire, Blackthorn sat with his back against a tree, keeping watch. She thought about her father, who'd died leaving them vulnerable. About her uncle, who'd sold them like property. About the auction platform and the leering faces and the terrible certainty that they were about to be separated forever. And she thought about this scarred giant who'd spent $500 to keep them together. Maybe he was a monster. Maybe they were riding straight into something worse than what they'd left behind. But maybe, just maybe, he was exactly what he claimed to be. A broken man trying to do one good thing. Evelyn closed her eyes and let herself hope. They reached Blackthorn's ranch just after noon on the third day. The valley opened up below them without warning. One moment they were climbing through dense forest. The next they crested a ridge, and there it was. A sprawling green valley hemmed in by mountains on 3 sides. A silver river cutting through the middle, and nestled against the western slope, a collection of buildings that looked almost too large to be a single ranch. Welcome to Blackthorn Ranch, Rowan said quietly. They descended in silence. Up close, the ranch was even more impressive. The main house was 2 stories, built from massive logs with a stone chimney at each end. The barn could have held 50 horses easily. There were corrals, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, a root cellar, and several other structures Evelyn couldn't identify. And it was completely empty. Where is everyone? Clara asked as they dismounted. There isn't anyone else, Blackthorn said. Just me. Well, us now. You run this whole place alone? Evelyn stared at him. Have been for 20 years. He started unsaddling his horse. It's manageable if you know what you're doing. That's insane. That's honest work. He glanced at her. You still interested? Evelyn looked at her sisters. They looked back at her with uncertainty and exhaustion and that same desperate hope she felt burning in her own chest. "Show us the house," she said. Blackthorn led them inside. The main room was cavernous, exposed beams overhead, a fireplace large enough to stand in, furniture that looked hand-built. Everything was clean but stark, functional, like someone had built a home and then forgotten to live in it. "4 bedrooms upstairs," Blackthorn said. "You can each have one. There's a washroom at the end of the hall, kitchens through there, pantries stocked. I hunt and trade with neighboring ranches for what I can't grow or raise myself." He showed them the rest of the house mechanically, like he was describing someone else's property. The bedrooms were simple but spacious. The beds were real beds with actual mattresses. There were windows with glass in them, and curtains that someone had sewn by hand years ago. Wren touched one of the curtains reverently. "Who made these?" Blackthorn's expression went carefully blank. "Someone who doesn't live here anymore." He left them to explore and headed back outside. The sisters stood in the upstairs hallway, looking at one another. "This is wrong," Claire said. "This whole place feels wrong." "How?" Evelyn asked. "Like a tomb. Like he built a home for people who died and now we're just ghosts haunting it." "Maybe that's exactly what we are," Daisy said quietly. "Maybe we're all ghosts haunting our old lives." Wren pushed open the door to one of the bedrooms. "I don't care if it's wrong. I haven't slept in a real bed in 2 months." She walked inside and sat down on the mattress, testing it. Then she lay back and closed her eyes. "Wren," Evelyn started. "I'm taking this room," Wren interrupted. "You can have whichever ones you want, but I'm staying right here." One by one, they chose rooms. Evelyn took the one closest to the stairs, the protector's position, even here. Clara claimed the one with the best light for reading. Daisy picked the smallest, tucked in the corner. Evelyn stood in her new room and looked out the window at the valley spreading out below. Cattle grazed in distant fields. The river glittered in the afternoon sun. Mountains rose up on all sides like walls keeping the world out, or keeping them in. Downstairs, she heard Blackthorn moving around in the kitchen. This was their life now, this strange, isolated ranch in the middle of nowhere, belonging to a man they didn't know, doing work they'd never done before. And somehow, impossibly, it felt safer than anywhere they'd been in months. Evelyn touched the window glass, feeling its cool smoothness beneath her fingers. "Please don't let this be a mistake," she whispered to the empty room. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Storm clouds were building over the western peaks. The valley waited in silence for whatever came next. The storm hit an hour after sunset. Evelyn woke to thunder crashing so loud it rattled the windows. Rain hammered the roof like fists demanding entry. She sat up in the unfamiliar bed, her heart racing, momentarily disoriented by the darkness and the strange room. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in," she called, her voice rough with sleep. Wren slipped inside, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Even in the dim light filtering through the window, Evelyn could see her sister was trembling. "Can't sleep?" Evelyn asked. "The thunder sounds like cannons." Wren sat on the edge of the bed. "Reminds me of when Father got sick. That last night. The storm that came through." Evelyn pulled her sister close. They sat together listening to the rain assault the house while lightning turned the world white every few seconds. "Do you think we're safe here?" Wren whispered. "I don't know yet." "That's not comforting." "You want comfort or truth?" Wren was quiet for a moment. "Truth, I guess." "Then the truth is, I don't know if we're safe, but we're together, and we're not standing on that platform anymore. That has to count for something." Another crack of thunder. Wren flinched. Downstairs they heard movement, heavy footsteps crossing the main room, the front door opening. "Where's he going?" Wren asked. Evelyn stood and moved to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could barely make out Blackthorn's massive silhouette heading toward the barn. Lightning flashed, and she saw him clearly for a moment, soaked through, moving with purpose through the storm. "Checking the animals, probably." Evelyn watched until he disappeared into the barn. "Storm like this, they get spooked. Should we help?" "I don't think he wants our help." But even as she said it, guilt gnawed at her. They were supposed to be earning their keep here. Honest work, Blackthorn had said. Hard to do that while hiding in bed during a storm. "Stay here," Evelyn told Wren. I'm going down. Evie, stay here. She grabbed the wool shawl Mrs. Mackey had given her and headed downstairs. The main room was dark except for dying embers in the fireplace. She could hear the wind howling through gaps in the logs, feel cold air seeping through despite the solid construction. Evelyn pulled on the boots by the door and stepped outside. The rain hit her like a physical blow. Within seconds she was drenched, her hair plastered to her face, the shawl useless against the deluge. She ran for the barn, splashing through puddles that hadn't existed an hour ago. Inside the barn, lantern light pushed back the darkness. The horses were restless in their stalls, stamping and whinnying. Blackthorn stood in the center aisle, trying to calm a particularly agitated mare. He looked up when Evelyn entered, surprise crossing his face. "What are you doing out here?" he called over the sound of rain on the roof. "Helping." She moved toward the nearest stall where a gelding was pacing nervously. "What do you need?" "I need you to go back inside before you catch pneumonia." "What do you need?" she repeated. Blackthorn stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded toward the far end of the barn. "Check the loft, make sure no water's getting through. Last storm like this, half the hay got ruined." Evelyn climbed the ladder to the loft. The space smelled like dried grass and old wood. She could hear rain drumming overhead, but when she ran her hands along the boards, everything felt dry. No leaks that she could find. She was about to climb back down when she noticed something in the corner, a small trunk, half hidden under loose hay. Something about it looked deliberately placed, like someone had tried to bury it. "Loft's dry," she called down. "Good, come help me with this one." She descended to find Blackthorn struggling with a young colt that was trying to kick its way through the stall door. The animal's eyes were rolling white with panic. "Talk to him," Blackthorn said. "Calm voice. Doesn't matter what you say." Evelyn approached slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Hey there, easy now. You're all right. Just some noise, that's all. Just the sky making a fuss." The colt's ears swiveled toward her voice. "That's right. Listen to me instead. Storm can't hurt you in here. You're safe. We've got you." She kept talking, nonsense mostly, while Blackthorn checked the colt's legs for injuries. Gradually, the animal calmed. Its breathing slowed. The wild panic in its eyes faded to ordinary fear. "You're good at that," Blackthorn said. "My father kept horses. Before." Evelyn stroked the colt's neck. "I used to help him with the difficult ones." "What else did you do on your father's farm?" "Everything. Whatever needed doing." She met his eyes. "I can handle hard work. So can my sisters." "Never said you couldn't." "You haven't said much of anything since we got here." Blackthorn returned his attention to the colt. "Not much to say. You could start with what you expect from us, what the work actually looks like." "Fair enough." He straightened up. "There's about 200 head of cattle scattered across the valley. They need checking daily. The horses need feeding, training, exercise. Garden needs tending. Food needs cooking, preserving. Fences need mending. Buildings need maintaining. Firewood needs cutting. In a few months, we'll be slaughtering for winter stores. It's sunrise to sunset most days, harder during calving season or when we're moving the herd. And you've been doing all this alone. Told you, it's manageable. It's impossible. Haven't died yet." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Though I've come close a few times." The storm was starting to ease. The thunder had moved off to the east, becoming distant rumbles instead of immediate crashes. The rain slowed from a deluge to a steady drumming. "Why'd you really buy us?" Evelyn asked quietly. Blackthorn was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "You ever feel like you're living in a house that died before you did?" "What?" "This ranch. I built it for a family, wife, daughter, future children. Built the big house with all those bedrooms. Built the barn too large. Cleared more land than one man needs. Then they died. And I just kept building anyway. Kept maintaining it. Kept it running like they might come back someday." He looked at her. 20 years of keeping a dead house alive. You asked why I bought you. Truth is, I'm tired of living alone in a monument to people who aren't coming back." The honesty of it hit Evelyn like a fist. She'd expected lies or evasion. Instead, he'd handed her raw truth. And it was almost worse. "We're not replacements," she said carefully. "I know. We can't fix whatever's broken in you." "I know that too." Blackthorn headed toward the barn door. but maybe you can help me figure out how to live in this place instead of just haunting it." He walked back out into the rain before she could respond. Evelyn stood alone among the settling horses, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man was damaged. That much was clear. But he was also honest in a way that most men weren't. And there was something almost desperate in his admission, like he was drowning and the sisters were the first rope someone had thrown him in 20 years. She climbed back up to the loft and found the trunk again. Her hands hovered over it, knowing she shouldn't look, knowing it was none of her business. She opened it anyway. Inside were children's clothes, a woman's shawl, a small wooden doll with painted features, letters tied with ribbon, and underneath it all, a daguerreotype in a tarnished frame. The woman in the photograph was beautiful, dark hair, kind eyes, a slight smile. She held a little girl on her lap, maybe 5 years old, with the same dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Evelyn's throat tightened. She closed the trunk carefully and covered it with hay again. When she climbed down, Blackthorn was back inside, checking the other stalls. "Found the trunk," she said. He stiffened. And nothing. It's none of my business." She paused. "But for what it's worth, they were beautiful." Blackthorn didn't turn around. "Yeah, they were." They finished checking the animals in silence. By the time they headed back to the house, the rain had stopped completely. Stars were beginning to appear through breaks in the clouds. At the door, Blackthorn paused. "Thank you for helping." "That's what you bought us for, isn't it? Help." "I bought you so you wouldn't be separated. The help is just you earning your keep." "Is there a difference?" "Yeah, there is." He met her eyes. "One makes you property. The other makes you people who live here." He went inside before she could respond. Evelyn stood on the porch watching the last of the storm clouds drift away. Tomorrow, they'd start learning how to actually run this place. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, for the first time since her father died, she felt like maybe they'd landed somewhere they could survive. The morning came too early. Evelyn woke to someone pounding on her door and Blackthorn's voice calling, "Sun's up! Work starts in 20 minutes." She dragged herself out of bed and found her sisters already stumbling around downstairs, bleary-eyed and confused. Blackthorn had coffee brewing and was frying eggs in a massive cast-iron skillet. "Eat fast," he said. "We've got a full day." The eggs were overdone, and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and filling. They ate standing up, too tired to sit. "Evelyn, you're with me checking the east pasture," Blackthorn said. "Clara, there's account books in the study that haven't been updated in about 5 years. See what you can make of them. Daisy, kitchen garden is overgrown. Start clearing it. Wren, I need the main room cleaned properly. Dust, sweep, everything." "You've got this whole day planned already?" Clara asked. "I've got the next 6 months planned." "You think running a ranch is improvisation?" He drained his coffee. "Evelyn, saddle up. We leave in 10. The east pasture turned out to be a 2-hour ride from the main house. They rode in silence through morning mist that clung to the valley floor like smoke. Blackthorn pointed out landmarks as they went, a distinctive pine tree, a rock formation shaped like a sleeping bear, a creek that ran year-round. "You need to memorize this valley," he said. "Winter comes, you get turned around in a snowstorm, these landmarks might save your life." Cheerful thought. It's a practical thought. This land will kill you if you're careless. The cattle were scattered across several acres, grazing peacefully. Blackthorn circled the herd slowly, counting, checking for injuries or signs of illness. Evelyn followed his lead, trying to see what he was seeing. "That one's limping," he said, pointing to a cow near the edge of the group. "See it?" Evelyn squinted. "Barely. You'll learn. There." He indicated another animal. "That one's got pink eye. We'll need to separate her, treat it before it spreads." They spent the next hour cutting the sick cow from the herd and driving her back toward the ranch. It was harder than Evelyn expected. The animal didn't want to leave her companions and kept trying to circle back. Her horse wasn't used to her yet and kept second-guessing her commands. By the time they got the cow into a pen near the barn, Evelyn was sweating and frustrated. "Not bad for a first try," Blackthorn said. "I lost her 3 times. But you got her in the end. That's what matters." He dismounted and started mixing medicine. "Tomorrow, we'll check the west pasture. Day after that, the north range. You'll do this circuit every week until you can do it in your sleep." "Every week?" "Cattle don't check themselves." He glanced at her. "This what you expected?" I don't know what I expected. Fair enough. They treated the cow's eye and turned her loose in the medical pen. By the time they got back to the house, it was past noon. Evelyn's legs ached from hours in the saddle and her hands were blistered from the reins. Inside, the house had been transformed. The main room was spotless. Wren had scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. The windows were clean enough to see through clearly. The floor had been swept and mopped. Even the furniture had been rearranged slightly, making the space feel less like a museum and more like a room people actually used. In the kitchen, Daisy was covered in dirt, but smiling. "The garden's salvageable," she announced. "There's strawberries under all those weeds. And herbs. Someone planted sage and thyme and rosemary years ago. They've gone wild, but they're still good." Clara emerged from the study looking dazed. "Your bookkeeping is a disaster. You've got 5 years of transactions just scrawled on random pieces of paper. No organization, no running totals. I can't even tell how much money you have." "Enough," Blackthorne said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting today." He headed toward the washroom. "Dinner's in 2 hours. Someone figure out what we're eating." The sisters looked at one another. "Is he always like this?" Wren asked. "I think so," Evelyn said. They cobbled together a meal from supplies in the pantry: salt pork, beans, biscuits that Daisy managed to make from memory. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, and there was enough of it. They ate at the large wooden table in the kitchen, the 5 of them spread out with empty chairs between. "This table seats 12, Clara observed. "It does," Blackthorne said. "Why do you have a table that seats 12? "Same reason I've got 4 bedrooms upstairs. I built for a family I thought I'd have." He didn't look up from his plate. "You're welcome to ask different questions." The rebuke was gentle but clear. Clara shut up. After dinner, Blackthorne disappeared outside again. The sisters cleaned up and then gathered in the main room, too tired to do much else. "He's not what I expected," Daisy said quietly. "What did you expect?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know. Someone cruel, maybe. Someone who'd use us." "He still might." "I don't think so." Daisy looked toward the window where they could see Blackthorne working on the corral fence in the fading light. "I think he's exactly what he said. A lonely man trying to figure out how to live again." "That doesn't make him safe," Clara warned. "No, but it makes him human." Wren stood and walked to the large stone fireplace. Above it, there was a rectangular patch where the stone was cleaner than the rest. "Something used to hang here." "Their portrait, probably," Evelyn said. "He took it down." "When?" "I don't know. Before we got here, I'd guess. Trying to make space for us, maybe." The thought sat heavy in the room. That night, Evelyn lay in bed too exhausted to sleep. Her muscles ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands were raw despite the gloves. And tomorrow would be the same. And the day after that. An endless chain of hard labor stretching into the future. But they were together. They had a roof. They had food. They had something that almost resembled safety. Through the wall, she could hear Wren crying softly. The girl did that sometimes, quiet tears in the dark when she thought no one could hear. Evelyn got up and slipped into Wren's room without knocking. Her youngest sister was curled up on the bed, face pressed into the pillow. "Can't sleep?" Evelyn sat on the edge of the mattress. "I keep thinking about the auction, about those men's faces." "I know." "Do you think we'll ever stop thinking about it?" Evelyn stroked her sister's hair. "I don't know. Maybe we just learn to think about it less. I hate that Uncle Gideon did this to us. I know. I hate that Father died and left us alone. That's not fair, Wren. He didn't choose to die. I know it's not fair. I still hate it." Wren rolled over, her face blotchy from crying. "Do you think Blackthorne's wife and daughter would hate us? For living in their house?" The question caught Evelyn off guard. "What?" "I saw their things, the curtains, the furniture. Everything they touched is still here, and now we're using it all. Do you think they'd be angry?" "I think they're dead, Wren. They don't feel anything anymore. But if they could, they can't." Evelyn kept her voice firm. "And spending energy worrying about the opinions of ghosts won't help us survive here. We've got real problems. Focus on those." Wren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's teaching you the ranch work. Claire's fixing his books. Daisy's got the garden. What am I supposed to do?" "You cleaned this whole house today. That's not real work, not like what you're doing. It's work that needed doing. That makes it real." Evelyn stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be just as hard as today. That's not comforting. You wanted truth, remember? Not comfort. She left Wren alone and headed back to her own room. But she paused in the hallway, looking down at the main room below. Through the window, she could see lamplight still burning in one of the outbuildings. Blackthorn, working late again. The man never seemed to stop. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm. Brutal, exhausting, but predictable. Evelyn spent her days learning the cattle business. Blackthorn taught her to spot illness, predict weather, read the land. He showed her which pastures to use when, how to rotate grazing, when to supplement with hay. He taught her to rope and brand and castrate, his instructions blunt and practical. Don't overthink it, he said when she hesitated before her first castration. It's necessary. The calf doesn't understand that, but you do. Be quick and be certain. She was quick and certain. And afterward she went behind the barn and threw up while Blackthorn pretended not to notice. Clara transformed the chaos of his record-keeping into something resembling order. She discovered he was sitting on considerably more money than he'd implied, profits from cattle sales that he'd never bothered to invest or spend. She created actual ledgers, organized receipts, projected next year's expenses. You could hire help, she told him one evening over dinner. Real ranch hands. You've got the money for it. Don't want strangers on my land, Blackthorn said. We're strangers. You're different. How? He didn't answer. Daisy reclaimed the garden and expanded it, planting late-season vegetables and herbs. She also started venturing into the forest, gathering wild plants with medicinal properties. She'd learned healing from their mother, who'd learned it from her grandmother. Now she had an entire wilderness to work with. She started treating Blackthorn's old injuries, the shoulder that never quite healed right, the knee that locked up in cold weather. He submitted to her ministrations with obvious reluctance, but didn't refuse. You should have had this looked at years ago, Daisy said, manipulating his shoulder joint. It's half frozen. Never had time. You had 20 years. Never had someone who cared enough to force the issue. The admission made Daisy pause. Then she went back to work, her hands firm but gentle. Wren struggled to find her place. She cleaned obsessively, trying to make herself useful, but there were only so many times you could sweep the same floor. Blackthorn finally noticed her frustration. You paint, don't you? He asked one morning. Wren looked up, startled. Some. I used to. There's art supplies in the chest in the study. My wife used them. You're welcome to them. I couldn't... They're just sitting there collecting dust. Use them or don't. Your choice. He walked away before Wren could respond. That afternoon, she found the chest. Inside were watercolors, brushes, paper, charcoal pencils. Everything still in good condition despite the years. She started painting the valley, the mountains, the cattle, the way light fell through the kitchen window in the morning. Small studies at first, hesitant, like she was asking permission from the ghost of the woman who'd owned these supplies. But gradually she grew bolder. One evening, Blackthorn came inside and found her working on a large watercolor of the ranch house at sunset. He stopped and stared at it for a long time. It's good, he said finally. Thank you. She would have liked it. My wife. She painted too, but never got this good. He turned away. Keep going. It was the closest thing to a blessing Wren was likely to get. The sisters began to relax. Not completely. They still watched Blackthorn carefully, still slept lightly, still startled at unexpected sounds. But the constant terror of the first days faded into something more manageable. They started talking at dinner. Real conversations, not just practical discussion of work. Blackthorn remained mostly silent, but he listened. Sometimes he even smiled at their stories. You're less terrifying when you smile, Clara told him one night. Good to know I'm still terrifying the rest of the time. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The weather turned colder. Autumn was coming early to the mountains. The aspens started changing color, turning the slopes into patchwork gold. Morning frost became common. The cattle began moving to lower pastures without being driven. Winter hits hard here, Blackthorn warned them. We've got maybe 6 weeks to finish preparations. After that, we're snowed in until spring. Snowed in? Wren asked. What does that mean? Means the passes close. Roads become impassable. We'll be completely isolated for 3, maybe 4 months, no supply runs, no visitors, just us and whatever we've stored. He looked at each of them. If that's going to be a problem, speak up now. The sisters exchanged glances. Where would we go? Evelyn asked quietly. Nowhere. I'm just giving you the reality. Some people don't handle isolation well. We've handled worse. Have you, though? Blackthorn's expression was serious. You've been through trauma. You've survived cruelty. But isolation is different. It gets in your head, makes you remember things you'd rather forget, makes small problems feel enormous. I've seen strong men crack during winter up here. Are you trying to scare us? Clara demanded. I'm trying to prepare you. Consider us prepared, Evelyn said. What needs doing? The work intensified. They cut firewood until Evelyn's back screamed. They smoked meat and preserved vegetables. They insulated buildings and repaired roofs. They moved supplies from the lower storage shed to the main house. Blackthorn drove them hard, but he worked harder himself. He was everywhere at once, mending fence, checking animals, hauling supplies. The man barely slept. He's going to kill himself, Daisy said one night after Blackthorn had worked past midnight again. He can't keep this pace. He's been keeping it for 20 years, Evelyn pointed out. That doesn't make it sustainable. But when Daisy tried to talk to him about it, Blackthorn just shrugged. Winter doesn't care if I'm tired. Work gets done or we suffer for it later. Then one morning, everything changed. Evelyn and Blackthorn were checking the North Range when they spotted riders in the distance. 3 men on horseback moving purposefully toward the ranch. Blackthorn went very still. Get back to the house. Now. Who are they? I don't know, but we don't get visitors. Ever. Move. They rode hard back to the ranch. By the time they arrived, the 3 riders were already there, sitting their horses in front of the main house. The sisters had emerged onto the porch, looking uncertain. The lead rider was older, well-dressed in a suit that looked out of place in the wilderness. The 2 men flanking him wore gun belts and had hard faces, and behind them, slouched in his saddle with a satisfied smile, was Gideon Pike. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. Well now, Gideon said pleasantly, isn't this cozy? Blackthorn dismounted slowly, positioning himself between the riders and the porch. You're on private property, Pike. I'm aware. That's why I brought the sheriff. Gideon gestured to the man in the suit. Sheriff Hutchins from Silver Creek. He's here to investigate some troubling allegations. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Mr. Blackthorn, I apologize for the intrusion, but Mr. Pike has made some serious claims about the welfare of these women. I need to verify their status. Their status is they live here, they work here, end of story. That's not quite end of story, Gideon interjected. These are my nieces, my blood, and I have reason to believe they're being held against their will. That's a lie, Evelyn snapped from the porch. Is it? Then why haven't you written? Why haven't you come to town? Why has no one seen or heard from any of you in nearly a month? Gideon's smile widened. I'm concerned, girls. We all are. Your uncle wants to make sure you're safe. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The man who'd sold them now pretending concern for their welfare. Sheriff Hutchins dismounted. I need to speak with the women, privately. They're not going anywhere with you, Blackthorn said flatly. I'm not asking them to. I just need to verify they're here of their own free will and not under duress. The sheriff looked at the sisters. Ladies, can you answer some questions? Evelyn stepped forward. We're fine. We're here because we choose to be. Under what arrangement? The sheriff asked. We work for room and board. You weren't working for your uncle? He claims you owe him for care provided after your father's death. Our uncle sold us at auction, Clara said, her voice shaking with rage. We owe him nothing. The auction was legal, Gideon said smoothly. Payment for debts owed. But I've had time to reconsider. These girls are family. They belong with family. I'm prepared to buy them back from Mr. Blackthorn and return them to proper guardianship. They're not for sale, Blackthorn said. Everything's for sale, Blackthorn. You proved that yourself. Gideon produced a document. I've got the money right here, $500. Same price you paid. You've had a month of free labor out of them. Call it even. No. Then I'll go higher, $700. That's a $200 profit for a month's work. Excellent return on investment. Blackthorn took a step forward. The movement was subtle but menacing. You need to leave. Now. I'll leave when I have what I came for. Sheriff, one of Gideon's hired guns spoke up. Man's getting hostile. Might be he's got reason to hide something. Sheriff Hutchins looked between Blackthorn and the sisters, clearly trying to figure out what was actually happening here. Ladies, he said carefully, I need you to be honest with me. Are you being held here against your will? No, all four sisters said in unison. Are you being mistreated in any way? No. Do you want to leave with your uncle? Absolutely not, Evelyn said. They're being coerced, Gideon insisted. Look at them, Sheriff. They're terrified of him. They won't speak freely while he's standing there threatening everyone. I haven't threatened anyone, Blackthorn said quietly. Yet. The tension crackled like lightning about to strike, and in that moment, standing on the porch of a house that had almost started to feel like home, with her sisters beside her and their abuser in front of her, Evelyn made a decision. You want to know the truth, Sheriff? She called out. Then I'll tell you. Our uncle beat us, starved us, stole our inheritance, and sold us to the highest bidder like we were livestock. Mr. Blackthorn bought us to keep us together. He's given us work, shelter, and respect. More respect than any man has shown us since our father died. If you try to take us back to Gideon Pike, you'll have to drag us. And we'll fight. All four of us. Silence fell across the yard. Sheriff Hutchins looked at Gideon. That true? About the beating? She's lying. All four of them are lying. They've been poisoned against me. Blackthorns filled their heads with the truth, Daisy interrupted. Her voice was soft but clear. Everything Evelyn said is true. You want proof? I've still got bruises from the last time he hit me. She pulled up her sleeve. Even from a distance, the yellowing marks were visible. The sheriff's expression hardened. Mr. Pike, I think you should leave. This is outrageous. These are my nieces. My responsibility. Your responsibility ended when you sold them. And unless you want me looking into assault charges, I suggest you ride out of here right now. Gideon's face went purple with rage. His hand dropped toward the gun at his belt, and Blackthorn moved. He was shockingly fast for such a large man. One moment he was standing still. The next he had Gideon by the throat. The smaller man lifted half out of his saddle. Touch that gun and I'll break your neck, Blackthorn said conversationally. Touch these women ever again, and I'll do worse. Are we clear? Gideon made choking sounds. I asked if we're clear. Clear, Gideon gasped. Blackthorn released him. Gideon collapsed back into his saddle, coughing. Sheriff, you witnessed assault? One of the hired guns said. I witnessed a man defending his property from a credible threat, Sheriff Hutchins said tiredly. Mr. Pike, let's go. Now. Gideon looked at the sisters one more time. The rage in his eyes was mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. Or recognition that he'd lost. This isn't over, he said hoarsely. Yeah, it is, Blackthorn replied. You come back here, you won't leave. The sheriff and his men turned their horses and rode off. Gideon followed, throwing venomous looks over his shoulder. They waited until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Then Evelyn's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. That was bad, Clara whispered. That was just the beginning, Blackthorn said. Pike won't let this go. Men like him never do. He was right. The war for their freedom had only just started. Blackthorn sat on the porch with a rifle across his knees, watching the darkness beyond the ranch yard. The sisters huddled in the main room, too rattled to retreat to their separate bedrooms. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. He's coming back, Wren whispered. Uncle Gideon, he's coming back and he's going to take us. He can't take us, Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. The sheriff said what he needed to say to avoid trouble. That doesn't mean he'll protect us if Gideon pushes harder. Evelyn paced the room, unable to sit still. We need a plan. The plan is we stay here and let Blackthorn handle it, Daisy said. That's not a plan. That's just hoping someone else solves our problems. You got a better idea? Evelyn didn't answer because she didn't have one. They were trapped. Not by Blackthorn, but by circumstance. By the law that saw women as property. By the reality that 4 women alone in the wilderness wouldn't last a week. By the fact that Gideon Pike had power they didn't. Money, connections, the presumption that family trumped everything. The door opened. Blackthorn stepped inside, the rifle still in his hands. You should all get some rest, he said. How? Evelyn demanded. How are we supposed to rest knowing he's out there planning something? By trusting I won't let him touch you. You can't watch us every second. I can try. Blackthorn leaned the rifle against the wall. Look, I know you're scared. You should be scared. Pike is dangerous. But he's also a coward. He brought the sheriff and hired guns because he's afraid to face me alone. That tells me something. It tells me he's smart enough to stack the odds, Clara said. Maybe. Or it tells me he knows he can't take what he wants by force, so he's trying legal channels. And legal channels move slow. That gives us time. Time for what? Evelyn asked. To make sure no court in the territory would side with him. To establish that you're here by choice, doing real work, living real lives. To build a case so solid that when he comes back, and he will come back, we can shut him down permanently. Blackthorn looked at each of them. But that means you need to be visible. You need to come to town with me. Meet people. Let them see you're not prisoners. Go back to Silver Creek? Wren's voice went high with panic. Where everyone watched us get sold? Not Silver Creek. There's a closer town. Bitter Creek. About 3 hours west. Smaller, but they've got a general store and a church. People there know me. Some of them, anyway. And you think parading us around will help? Claire asked skeptically. I think making you real people instead of rumors will help. Right now, Pike can say whatever he wants about what's happening here. But if folks have met you, talked to you, seen you're healthy, and choosing this life, his lies carry less weight. It made sense. Evelyn hated that it made sense because it meant going back out into the world where people stared and judged and saw them as something less than human. But staying hidden meant letting Gideon control the narrative. When? She asked. 3 days. That gives us time to finish critical winter prep and gives you time to practice being... Blackthorn paused, choosing his words carefully. Being convincing. Convincing? You need to look like you belong here. Not like captives, not like servants. Like women who chose this life and are making it work. He met Evelyn's eyes. Can you do that? She thought about the auction platform, about the leering faces and the humiliation and the terror of being separated from her sisters. Then she thought about the past month, the hard work, the exhaustion, but also the slow rebuilding of something that felt almost like dignity. We can do that, she said. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Blackthorn taught them the story they'd tell if anyone asked direct questions. They'd answered an advertisement for ranch help. The terms were fair, room and board in exchange for labor. They were learning valuable skills. They were treated well. It was all technically true, just missing the uglier parts about auctions and desperation. Don't volunteer information, Blackthorn instructed, but don't act like you're hiding something either. You're just 4 women working an honest job. That's all anyone needs to know. Clara balked at the deception. We're lying. We're protecting ourselves, Evelyn corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Lying is when you're doing something wrong and trying to cover it up. This is when the truth is too complicated for people who won't care about the nuance anyway. Daisy spent hours coaching Wren, who still trembled at the thought of talking to strangers. You don't have to say much, just smile, nod. Let us do most of the talking, but if someone asks you directly if you're happy here, you need to be able to say yes and mean it. But I don't know if I'm happy here, Wren said miserably. Then think about the alternative. Would you rather be back on that platform? Sold to some miner who'd use you and discard you? Or would you rather be here, painting in the evenings and learning to tend a garden and sleeping in a real bed? Here. Obviously here. Then that's your answer. On the morning of the 4th day, they rode out before dawn. The trip to Bitter Creek took them through terrain Evelyn hadn't seen before. Narrow canyons, dense forest, a river crossing that made the horses nervous. Blackthorn rode ahead, constantly scanning the landscape. Looking for something? Evelyn asked, bringing her horse alongside his. Always looking. It's how you stay alive up here. You really think Gideon would ambush us? I think Gideon wants you back under his control and doesn't care how he gets it. An ambush on an isolated trail? Easy to claim it was bandits, easy to make us all disappear. He glanced at her. I'm not taking chances with your lives. The word settled something in Evelyn's chest. For all his gruffness and emotional distance, Blackthorn actually cared whether they lived or died. It was a low bar, but it was higher than most men had cleared. Bitter Creek appeared around midday, a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a creek that probably justified the town's name. There was a general store, a blacksmith, a small church, a boarding house, and what looked like a saloon that had seen better days. Not much to look at, Blackthorn said, but the people are decent, mostly. They dismounted in front of the general store. Evelyn's legs were stiff from the long ride. Beside her, Wren looked ready to bolt. "Steady," Evelyn murmured. "We're just buying supplies. Nothing dramatic." The store was dim and cluttered, every surface covered with goods. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s with suspicious eyes and flour on her apron. "Blackthorn," she said flatly. "Heard you had visitors." "News travels fast, Ruth." "Always does, especially when it's interesting news." Ruth's gaze swept over the sisters. "These the women everyone's talking about." "This is Evelyn, Clara, Daisy, and Wren. They work my ranch. Ladies, this is Ruth Porter. She runs the store and knows everyone's business." "Someone has to," Ruth said. She studied the sisters with an intensity that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "You girls being treated all right?" "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn said. "Working you hard?" "Hard enough." "Getting paid?" Evelyn hesitated. They weren't getting paid in money, just room and board. Blackthorn stepped in smoothly. "Their wages go toward room and board, standard arrangement." Ruth's expression said she didn't quite believe it, but she nodded. "You need supplies?" They spent the next 20 minutes gathering items: flour, sugar, coffee, other staples they'd need for winter. Ruth watched them the whole time, her eyes sharp and evaluating. When they brought everything to the counter, Ruth rang it up slowly. "You know," she said conversationally, "your uncle was through here 2 days ago. Told a very different story about your situation." Evelyn's blood went cold. "He was here?" "Stopped in for tobacco, said his nieces had been kidnapped by a mountain man, said he was working with the law to get you back. Seemed real concerned." "He's lying," Claire said. "Figured he might be. Man's got shifty eyes." Ruth bagged the supplies. "But I needed to hear it from you. You girls here because you want to be?" "Yes," all four sisters said simultaneously. Ruth studied them for another long moment. Then she nodded. "All right then. That'll be $12. Blackthorn paid, and they loaded the supplies onto the horses. As they were preparing to leave, a man emerged from the church across the street, older, wearing a collar that identified him as the minister. "Rowan Blackthorn," the man called. "Haven't seen you in years." "Reverend Morrison." Blackthorn's tone was carefully neutral. "I've been busy." "So I hear." Morrison approached, his eyes on the sisters. "These the young ladies I've been hearing about?" "They are. Gideon Pike came to see me. Asked me to pray for their safe return to family." Morrison's expression was kind, but probing. "Should I be praying for that?" "You should pray for whatever you think needs praying for, Reverend, but these women are exactly where they choose to be." Mr. Pike seemed to think otherwise. Evelyn stepped forward before Blackthorn could respond. "Mr. Pike sold us at auction, Reverend. Sold us to pay debts he claimed we owed. Mr. Blackthorn bought us to keep us together. We're working for him now, and we're treated fairly. That's the truth, whether my uncle wants to admit it or not." Morrison looked shocked. "Sold you? At auction?" "In Silver Creek, a month ago. You can verify it if you want. There were dozens of witnesses." "That's—" Morrison seemed genuinely disturbed. "That's unconscionable." "It's also legal," Clara added bitterly. "Unfortunately." "The law and morality don't always align," Morrison said quietly. He turned to Blackthorn. "You took these women in?" "I did." "And you're treating them well?" "I'm treating them like people. That seems to be a rare thing in this territory." Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If you ever need sanctuary, any of you, the church doors are always open, just so you know." It was the first time anyone outside their small group had offered help without conditions attached. Evelyn felt something loosen in her throat. "Thank you, Reverend," she managed. They rode out of Bitter Creek with lighter supplies and heavier hearts. The fact that Gideon was already spreading his version of events meant the battle was being fought on multiple fronts. "That went better than expected," Blackthorn said once they were clear of town. "Did it?" Claire asked. "He's been here. He's poisoning people against us." "He tried." But Ruth didn't believe him, and neither did Morrison. That's 2 people who will speak in our favor if it comes to it. And how many will speak against us? How many heard his lies and believed them? Blackthorn didn't have an answer for that. The ride home was tense. They followed a different trail, Blackthorn's paranoia about ambushes making him vary their route. The sun was setting by the time the ranch came into view, and something was wrong. Evelyn saw it immediately, smoke rising from the barn. Not the thick black smoke of a full fire, but thin gray wisps that meant something was smoldering. "Stay here," Blackthorn ordered. He kicked his horse into a gallop. The sisters ignored him and followed. The barn door hung open. Inside, someone had scattered hay and lit it in several places. The fires were small, deliberately so, not meant to destroy the barn but to send a message. Blackthorn was already stamping out the flames, his face dark with rage. The sisters grabbed buckets and helped, dousing the burning hay before it could spread. 10 minutes later, the fires were out. The damage was minimal, some burnt hay, scorch marks on the floor. But the message was clear. "He knows where we are," Daisy whispered. "He knows how to hurt us." "This wasn't Gideon," Blackthorn said. He pointed to hoof prints in the dirt. 2 horses, both shod. "These are the prints from his hired guns." "Why didn't they burn the whole thing down?" Wren asked. "Because that would bring the law down on whoever did it. This way, it's just vandalism. Hard to prove. Harder to prosecute." Blackthorn examined the barn carefully. "They wanted us scared. They wanted us to know they can reach us." "Well, it worked," Clara said. Her hands were shaking. "I'm scared." "Good. Fear keeps you alert." Blackthorn headed for the tack room. "From now on, we don't leave the ranch unguarded. Someone stays behind every time we go out. We install better locks, we keep weapons accessible, and we watch the tree line." "This is insane," Evelyn said. "We're preparing for a siege." "We're preparing to survive. There's a difference." That night, Blackthorn taught them all to shoot. He set up targets in the yard and brought out rifles, showing them how to load, aim, and fire. Evelyn took to it naturally. Her father had taught her the basics years ago. Clara was a terrible shot, but determined to improve. Daisy had steady hands from her healing work, which translated to decent accuracy. Wren flinched every time the gun went off, but eventually managed to hit the target. "You don't need to be expert marksman," Blackthorn said. "You just need to be dangerous enough that attacking you seems like a bad idea. Most men won't risk getting shot, even by a woman who can barely aim." "Encouraging," Clara muttered. "It's realistic, and realistic keeps you alive longer than optimistic." They practiced until dark, until their shoulders ached from the rifle's kick and their ears rang from the gunfire. Then Blackthorn collected the weapons and locked them in the house. "Keep one in your room," he told Evelyn. "You're the steadiest shot. If something happens at night, you'll need it." She took the rifle without argument. Sleep came hard that night. Evelyn lay in bed with the rifle propped against the nightstand, listening to the house settle around her. Every creak was a potential intruder. Every gust of wind was someone approaching. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Blackthorn was sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning his own rifle by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, but didn't seem surprised. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Kept thinking I heard things." "You probably did. Lots of things move around at night up here. Most of them won't hurt you." "Very comforting." "Wasn't trying to comfort you. Was trying to give you context." He went back to cleaning. "You did good today. In town. With Ruth and the Reverend." I told the truth that needed telling. "That's harder than it sounds." He set down the cleaning cloth. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. The threats, the fear, having to defend your right to exist here. If you want to leave, I'll help you. Get you somewhere safe, somewhere Gideon can't reach you." Evelyn sat down across from him. "Where would that be?" "You said yourself the law sees us as property. Gideon has legal claim as our guardian until we're married off or dead. Leaving here just means being vulnerable somewhere else." "Maybe, but at least you wouldn't be dragging me into your fight." "Is that what bothers you? That we're a burden?" "No. What bothers me is that I can't guarantee your safety. I can protect you from most things, but if Gideon brings enough men or enough legal pressure, there's a limit to what I can do." His gray eyes were intense in the lamplight. "I don't want to fail you the way I failed my family." There it was, the truth beneath everything else. This wasn't about the sisters at all. It was about Blackthorn trying to save people he'd been unable to save 20 years ago. "We're not your wife and daughter," Evelyn said gently. "You don't owe us their lives. I owe you something. I bought you. That makes you my responsibility." "No. That makes us people who live under your roof. The responsibility goes both ways." She leaned forward. "You gave us shelter when we had nowhere else to go. You've taught us skills we can use. You've treated us like human beings. That's more than most men would have done. But you can't carry all the weight of keeping us safe. We have to fight for ourselves, too." Blackthorn was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your father raised you right. My father died and left us to wolves." "He didn't choose to die." "Neither did your wife." Evelyn held his gaze. "Sometimes bad things just happen. That doesn't make them your fault." She stood and headed back upstairs before he could respond. Behind her, she heard him resume cleaning the rifle, the soft scrape of metal on metal following her up the stairs. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in paranoia. Blackthorn installed new locks on every door. He built shutters for the ground floor windows that could be barred from inside. He moved emergency supplies into the root cellar: food, water, weapons, ammunition. "You're turning this place into a fort," Clara observed. "I'm turning it into a place that's hard to attack," Blackthorn corrected. "There's a difference." He also varied his routine, never following the same pattern 2 days in a row. He'd check different pastures at different times, take different trails to the same destinations, sometimes stay close to the house for days, and sometimes range far into the valley. "Makes it harder to predict where I'll be," he explained. "Harder to set an ambush." The sisters adapted. They learned to recognize the sounds of normal ranch activity versus something wrong. They practiced their shooting. They kept watch when Blackthorn was gone. And slowly, despite the fear, life continued. The garden produced a late crop of vegetables that Daisy preserved in jars. Clara finished organizing the accounts and discovered Blackthorn was actually wealthy by frontier standards. Years of profitable cattle sales had accumulated into serious money. "You could buy a house in San Francisco," she told him. "Why are you living like this?" "Because I like living like this." "In isolation? In constant work? In peace? Or what passes for it?" He glanced at her. "Money doesn't fix what's broken. It just makes the brokenness more comfortable." Wren finished a painting of the valley at sunrise and hung it in the main room. It transformed the space, adding color and life to walls that had been bare for 2 decades. Blackthorn stared at it for a full minute without speaking. "It's too much," Wren said nervously. "I can take it down." "Don't." His voice was rough. "It's perfect. She would have loved it." He walked away before Wren could respond, but the painting stayed. Evelyn noticed Blackthorn changing in small ways. He smiled more, talked more, seemed less like a ghost haunting his own life and more like a man actually living it. One evening, she found him on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains orange and gold. "You're different than when we got here," she said. "So are you." "How am I different?" "Less scared, more sure of yourself." He glanced at her. "You're becoming who you would have been if life hadn't beaten it out of you." "That's supposed to be a compliment?" "It's an observation." They stood in comfortable silence, watching darkness creep across the valley. "Do you think he'll come back?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Gideon? Yeah, men like him don't quit." "When?" "Soon, probably. He's building his case, lining up support. When he thinks he's got enough leverage, he'll make his move." "And then what?" "Then we fight, and we win or we don't." Blackthorn turned to face her. "But either way, I won't let him take you without a hell of a battle." The conviction in his voice sent chills down Evelyn's spine. 3 days later, Gideon made his move. They came at dawn. Gideon, Sheriff Hutchins, 4 hired guns, and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Judge Carter from the territorial court. Blackthorn met them in the yard, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. The sisters stood on the porch behind him, their own weapons visible. "This is quite the welcome party," Judge Carter said dryly. "You bring an army to my door, I respond accordingly," Blackthorn replied. "I bring witnesses and legal authority. Mr. Pike has petitioned the court to have his nieces returned to his custody. I'm here to evaluate the situation and make a determination. The situation is 4 women living and working on my ranch by choice. Mr. Pike disputes that. Mr. Pike is a liar. That's what we're here to determine." Judge Carter dismounted. "I'll need to speak with the women. Privately. No, Blackthorn said. Excuse me? You want to talk to them? You do it with me present. I don't trust Pike or anyone he brought with him. That's not how this works. It's how it works on my property. The standoff stretched. Finally, Gideon spoke up. Let him stay, Judge. We've got nothing to hide. Let these poor girls tell you in front of their captor how happy they are. I'm sure it'll be very convincing. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut. Judge Carter looked annoyed but nodded. Fine. Ladies, please step forward. The sisters descended from the porch. Evelyn led, her head high despite the trembling in her hands. Clara and Daisy flanked her. Wren brought up the rear, pale but determined. I'll ask you each individually, Carter said. Are you here of your own free will? Yes, Evelyn said. Yes, Clara echoed. Yes, Daisy confirmed. Yes, Wren whispered. Are you being compensated for your work? Room, board, and training, Evelyn said. We're learning skills we can use. Have you been threatened or coerced in any way? Only by the men my uncle sold us to, Evelyn said sharply. Mr. Blackthorn has never threatened us. That's a lie, Gideon burst out. He's got them terrified. Look at them. They're armed like criminals. We're armed because your hired thugs set fire to our barn, Clara snapped. We're defending ourselves from you. You see, Judge, they're delusional. They need help. Judge Carter held up a hand for silence. He studied the sisters carefully. You understand that as your legal guardian, Mr. Pike has the right to determine your living arrangements? He forfeited that right when he sold us at auction, Evelyn said. He gave up guardianship for $500. You can verify it. There's a bill of sale. I've seen the bill of sale. Unfortunately, such sales are not legally binding in terms of transferring guardianship. Only marriage or death can do that. The words hit like hammer blows. So what? Claire demanded. He can sell us and then reclaim us whenever he wants? That's not law. That's slavery. It's complicated, Carter admitted. And frankly, this case is beyond my authority to settle definitively. It'll need to go to a higher court. How long will that take? Blackthorn asked. Months. Maybe longer. And in the meantime, the status quo remains. The women stay where they are until the court makes a final determination. Gideon's face went red. That's unacceptable. These are my nieces, my blood. And they're also adults capable of making their own choices, even if the law doesn't fully recognize that yet. Carter looked at Gideon with obvious distaste. I've heard enough to know that forcing them to return with you today would be cruel and possibly dangerous. They stay here until the courts decide otherwise. This is an outrage. This is my ruling. You're welcome to appeal to a higher authority, Mr. Pike. But for now, these women remain at Blackthorn Ranch. Carter turned to the sheriff. That clear enough for you, Hutchins? The sheriff, who'd been silent throughout, nodded. Clear as day, Judge. Then we're done here. Gideon looked like he wanted to explode. His hired guns looked restless, hands drifting toward weapons. The tension in the yard was explosive. Then Blackthorn raised his rifle slightly, not aiming it at anyone, just reminding everyone it was there. Time for you to leave, he said quietly. Judge Carter mounted his horse. I'll be filing a full report with the territorial court. Expect this matter to be revisited in the spring. We'll be here, Blackthorn said. The party rode out slowly, Gideon seething with impotent rage. They watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Evelyn let herself breathe. We won, Wren said, her voice shaking. We survived, Blackthorn corrected. That's not the same as winning. But as they walked back into the house together, Evelyn allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, probably foolish hope. But hope nonetheless. The relief lasted exactly 3 hours. They were in the kitchen preparing dinner when Clara said what they'd all been thinking. Spring. He said spring. That's 5 months away. 5 months of waiting for the courts to decide if we're human beings or property. 5 months of living like this, Daisy added quietly. She was chopping carrots with more force than necessary. Always watching, always afraid. Wren didn't say anything. She just stared at her hands, which were shaking too badly to hold a knife. Blackthorn stood in the doorway, listening. You want to run? I'll help you. Get you somewhere far enough that Gideon can't find you. Where? Evelyn demanded. California? Oregon? He tracked us here. What makes you think he won't track us anywhere else? Because next time I'll make sure he can't follow. The implication hung heavy in the air. Evelyn looked at him sharply. You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about solving the problem permanently. That's murder. That's survival. Blackthorn's expression was flat. You think the law will protect you? You saw what just happened. They acknowledged Gideon sold you, acknowledged he's a liar and a brute, and they're still giving him 5 months to build a case. The system isn't designed to help you. It's designed to maintain order, and order means men control property. We're not property, Clara said fiercely. I know that. You know that. But the law disagrees, so we can wait for the law to catch up with basic human decency, or we can handle this ourselves. By murdering my uncle, Evelyn said. By removing a threat that won't stop until you're back under his control or dead. Blackthorn looked at each of them. I'm not saying I want to do it. I'm saying it might be necessary. And if it comes to that, you need to decide now if you can live with it. The sisters exchanged glances. None of them spoke. Think about it, Blackthorn said. You've got time, but not forever. He left them alone in the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the porch outside. Wren started crying first, quiet tears that she tried to hide by turning away. Daisy put an arm around her shoulders. He's wrong, Clara said. We can't just kill someone because he's inconvenient. Gideon's not inconvenient, Evelyn said quietly. He's dangerous. And Blackthorn's right about one thing. The law won't help us. We saw that today. So what? We become murderers? We become survivors. There's a difference. Is there? Clara's voice cracked. Father taught us right from wrong. Killing is wrong, even if the person deserves it. Father's dead, Evelyn said bluntly. His morality died with him. We're living in the world as it actually is, not as he wanted it to be. That's a terrible thing to say. It's a true thing to say. They finished preparing dinner in tense silence. When Blackthorn came back inside, nobody mentioned the earlier conversation. They ate mechanically, the food tasteless despite Daisy's careful seasoning. After dinner, Evelyn found Blackthorn in the barn tending to an injured horse. The animal had cut its leg on barbed wire earlier that day, and Blackthorn was cleaning the wound with the same methodical care he brought to everything. You didn't mean it, Evelyn said, about killing Gideon. I meant every word. You're trying to scare us. I'm trying to prepare you for reality. He didn't look up from the horse. You think Gideon will stop? You think he'll accept the court's ruling if it goes against him? Men like him don't accept defeat. They escalate. So we escalate first, if necessary. If Evelyn watched him work for a moment. His hands were gentle despite their size, careful not to cause the horse unnecessary pain. Have you killed before? She asked. Yes. The answer was immediate and unflinching. In the war. And after. He finished bandaging the horse's leg and straightened. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. Sometimes killing is the only language violent men understand. My father would have said violence begets violence. Your father was right, it does. But sometimes you don't get to choose peace. Sometimes peace chooses to abandon you, and you're left with survival or surrender. He met her eyes. I watched my wife and daughter burn because I wasn't there to save them. I won't watch you and your sisters suffer because I was too moral to do what's necessary. That's not your choice to make. Then make it yourself. Decide what you're willing to do to stay free. Decide what line you won't cross. But decide soon, because Gideon won't wait for you to find your courage. He left the barn before she could respond. Evelyn stood alone among the horses, breathing in the smell of hay and leather and trying to untangle her thoughts. Everything Blackthorn said made horrible sense, but accepting that logic meant accepting they lived in a world where murder was sometimes justified. Was that true? Or was it just easier than fighting for a better answer? She didn't know. The first snow came 2 weeks later. Evelyn woke to find the valley transformed, everything white and silent, the mountains invisible behind heavy clouds. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. We're trapped now, Blackthorn said at breakfast. Passes are closed. Nobody's getting in or out until spring. What about Gideon? Wren asked. What about him? He's trapped too. Can't bring hired guns through 10 feet of snow. Can't haul legal documents across blocked mountain passes. For the next 4 months, we're completely isolated. Is that good or bad? Clara asked. Both. We're safe from immediate threats, but we're also on our own if something goes wrong. Medical emergency, fire, injury, we handle it ourselves or we die. Cheerful as always, Clara muttered. But despite the grim assessment, something shifted in the house over the following weeks. The constant tension eased. Without the threat of Gideon's immediate return, the sisters could breathe again. They settled into winter routines. The work was different from summer, less outdoor labor, more maintenance and preparation. They spent days cutting firewood, preserving food, repairing equipment. The cattle were moved to lower pastures where they could be fed hay when the grass disappeared under snow. Evenings were long. The sun set early and rose late. They gathered in the main room around the fire, finding ways to pass the time. Clara read aloud from books she'd found in Blackthorn's study. Novels, histories, poetry. Her voice filled the empty spaces, made the house feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Daisy taught them to make medicine from the herbs she'd dried. She showed them how to treat common injuries, set broken bones, identify illness before it became serious. Wren painted. She covered page after page with watercolors of the valley, the mountains, the ranch itself. Sometimes she painted her sisters. Once, shyly, she painted Blackthorn sitting on the porch at sunset. He stared at it for a full minute without speaking, then carefully hung it on the wall beside the painting of the ranch house. "You're making this place look lived in," he said gruffly. "Is that bad?" Wren asked. "No, it's good. It's been dead too long." Evelyn spent her evenings helping Blackthorn plan the next year's work. They spread maps across the kitchen table and discussed cattle rotation, fence repairs, which pastures needed rest. "You're a natural at this," Blackthorn said one night. "The management side. You see the big picture. My father taught me. He always said a good farm ran on planning, not luck." Smart man. He was, until cholera killed him. She traced a finger along a creek marked on the map. Sometimes being smart isn't enough. No, sometimes the world just takes what it wants. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Blackthorn said, "You've stopped looking at me like I might hurt you." Evelyn glanced up. "When did I stop?" "A couple weeks ago. After the snow came, you started relaxing. Hard to see you as a threat when you're teaching Wren to make biscuits. I'm a terrible baker. That's not the point. The point is you're trying." She set down her pencil. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone cruel, someone who bought us for the obvious reasons. And now? Now I think you bought us because you're lonely and broken and saw other lonely, broken people who needed help." She held his gaze. "I think you're trying to save us because you couldn't save them." Blackthorn's expression went carefully blank. "Don't psychoanalyze me." "Why not? You've been doing it to us since we got here." "That's different." "How?" "Because you needed it. I don't. Everyone needs it, especially people who've been alone for 20 years. He stood abruptly. "I'm checking the animals." "It's midnight." "So?" "So you're running away from this conversation." "Yes, I am." He grabbed his coat. "Some conversations aren't worth having." He left before she could push further. But the next morning, there was fresh coffee waiting when she came downstairs. And the morning after that, he asked her opinion on which bulls to sell in spring. Small gestures that said he'd heard her even if he couldn't admit it. The isolation did strange things to all of them. Clara, who'd always been reserved, started opening up. She talked about the books she'd read, the education she'd wanted before circumstances destroyed that dream. She admitted she'd wanted to be a teacher, maybe even start a school. "You still could," Blackthorn said one evening. "There's kids in the valley, ranchers' children growing up wild with no education. You could teach them." Who'd come to a school run by a woman with no credentials? People who want their children to read, that's credential enough out here. The idea took root. Clara started planning curriculum, organizing the books in Blackthorn's study, imagining what a frontier school might look like. Daisy grew more confident in her healing. When Blackthorn cut his hand badly on a broken fence post, she stitched it without hesitation, her hand steady despite his size and the blood. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked through gritted teeth. "My mother. She was the closest thing our town had to a doctor. She taught you well. She's dead now, along with everything else we lost. Death doesn't erase what you learn from someone. That stays." Daisy paused mid-stitch. "You believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, my wife's been gone for nothing. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife voluntarily. Daisy finished the stitching in silence, giving him space to say more if he wanted. He didn't. But the next day he showed her where he'd buried them. A quiet spot overlooking the valley with two simple wooden markers. "I come here sometimes," he said. "Talk to them, tell them about the ranch. Probably seems crazy." "It's not crazy, it's grief." "Same thing sometimes." "No, crazy is forgetting they existed. Grief is remembering they mattered." Blackthorn didn't respond, but he stood a little straighter when they walked back to the house. Wren struggled the most with Winter's isolation. She'd always been the most fragile sister, the one who needed people and sunlight and open spaces. Being trapped inside for weeks at a time made her anxious. "I can't breathe," she told Evelyn one particularly bad day. "The walls are too close, the ceiling's too low. I need out." "It's 20 below outside. You'd freeze in minutes." "I don't care. I can't stay in here," Blackthorn overheard. Without a word, he bundled her into every layer of warm clothing they had and took her outside. They walked the perimeter of the ranch yard, Blackthorn breaking trail through waist-deep snow while Wren followed in his footsteps. They were out for maybe 15 minutes. When they came back, Wren's cheeks were bright red from cold, but her eyes were calmer. "Better?" Blackthorn asked. "Better. Thank you. Tomorrow we'll go farther. Build up your tolerance. Winter's long. You need coping strategies." He made good on the promise. Every day, regardless of weather, he took Wren outside for a walk. Sometimes the other sisters joined them. Sometimes it was just the two of them, the giant and the frightened girl, trudging through snow in companionable silence. Evelyn watched these excursions from the window and felt something shift in her chest. This was what family looked like. Not blood, not legal obligation, just people taking care of each other because they decided to. Christmas came and went. They had no decorations, no gifts, no traditional celebration. But Daisy made a special dinner, and Wren painted a winter scene that she presented to Blackthorn with shy pride. "It's the valley," she explained, "how it looks from the ridge. I wanted you to have it." Blackthorn stared at the painting for a long moment. Then he cleared his throat roughly. "It's beautiful. Thank you." He hung it in his bedroom. Evelyn saw it there later when delivering clean laundry, placed where he'd see it first thing every morning. January brought harder cold. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the pipes. They had to melt snow for drinking water and huddle around the fire to stay warm. One particularly brutal night, the main room fireplace wasn't enough. They dragged blankets and pillows downstairs and slept in a pile near the fire like refugees. Blackthorn sat up, keeping watch, feeding the fire throughout the night. When Evelyn woke around 3 in the morning, she found him sitting in his chair with a blanket around his shoulders, staring into the flames. "You should sleep," she whispered. "Someone needs to tend the fire." "Wake me. I'll take a shift." "I don't sleep much anyway. Haven't for years." Evelyn sat up, careful not to disturb her sisters. "Nightmares?" "Memories. Same thing in the dark." She moved to the chair beside his. For a while they sat in silence, watching the fire paint shadows across the room. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally. "Buying us?" "No. Not even a little? We brought you nothing but trouble." "You brought life back into a dead house. That's not trouble." He glanced at her. "Do you regret coming here?" "Some days, when I think about what we left behind, what we could have been if things were different." "What would you have been?" "I don't know. Married probably. Running my father's farm. Having children. The normal things women do." She pulled her blanket tighter. "Now I'm learning to castrate cattle and shoot rifles and defend my right to exist. Not exactly what I imagined. Better or worse?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Better or worse than what you imagined?" Evelyn considered it. "Different. Harder in some ways, freer in others. I never had to make real choices before. Everything was decided for me. By my father, by circumstances, by expectations. Now I decide. Even if the options all suck, they're my decisions. Freedom's like that. It's mostly choosing which burden to carry." "That's depressing." "That's honest." They lapsed back into silence. The fire crackled. Outside, wind howled through the valley. Somewhere in the pile of blankets, one of her sisters murmured in her sleep. "I meant what I said," Blackthorn said quietly. "About Gideon. If he comes back in spring making trouble, I'll handle it, whatever that takes." "I know you meant it. That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because I'm starting to think you might be right. That killing him might be the only way we ever have peace." She looked at him. "And that terrifies me. Not the killing itself, but how easily I'm accepting it as an option. That's not weakness. That's pragmatism." "My father would disagree." "Your father lived in a gentler world. Or maybe he just had the privilege of pretending it was gentle. You don't have that privilege." "Neither do you." "No. I burned through that privilege 20 years ago." Evelyn wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression stopped her. Some wounds were too deep to probe, even after all this time. "Get some sleep," Blackthorn said. "I'll wake you if the fire needs attention." She returned to her makeshift bed, but didn't sleep. Instead, she lay awake thinking about violence and survival and the thin line between justice and murder. By the time dawn came, she still hadn't found an answer. February brought a thaw. Temperatures rose just enough to melt some of the snow, turning the ranch yard into a muddy mess. The relief was temporary. Everyone knew the worst of winter wasn't over yet. But the brief respite let them venture farther from the house. Blackthorn took Evelyn to check on the cattle, navigating through slush and ice to reach the lower pastures. The herd had survived winter so far, though they'd lost a few older animals. Blackthorn examined each loss, determining whether it was natural causes or something preventable. "This one starved," he said, studying a dead cow. "Got separated from the herd, couldn't find her way back. Froze before she starved, probably." "Could we have saved her?" "If we'd found her in time. But you can't save everything. Part of ranching is accepting loss." "Part of life is accepting loss," Evelyn corrected. "True enough." They buried the carcass to keep scavengers from getting bold, then continued checking the rest of the herd. The work was cold and muddy and exhausting, but there was something satisfying about it. Something real. On the ride back, Evelyn said, "I want to learn the business side, not just the labor." "You've been learning it. The planning, the record keeping?" "No, I mean really learn it. How to buy and sell cattle, how to negotiate prices, how to read markets. Everything you do to keep this place profitable." Blackthorn was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why?" "Because someday you might not be here, or we might not be here. And I want to know I could run a ranch if I had to, that I'm not dependent on anyone's goodwill to survive." "You planning on leaving?" "I'm planning on being prepared. There's a difference." He smiled slightly. "Fair enough. We'll start with market fundamentals. How cattle prices work, what drives demand, when to sell, and when to hold." "When do we start?" "Tonight. After dinner." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. That evening, Blackthorn spread ledgers and price sheets across the kitchen table and began teaching Evelyn the economics of cattle ranching. Clara joined them, her head for numbers, making her a natural student. Daisy listened while preparing preserves. Even Wren sat nearby, sketching but absorbing the conversation. "You're teaching us to replace you," Clara observed. "I'm teaching you to be self-sufficient. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Self-sufficient means you don't need me. Replace means I'm gone. I'm not planning on going anywhere." "But if you did, if I did, you'd be able to run this place without me. That's the point." The lessons continued nightly. Blackthorn was a patient teacher, explaining concepts until they made sense, never condescending or impatient when they asked questions. Slowly, the sisters began to see the ranch differently. Not as Blackthorn's property that they temporarily occupied, but as something they were learning to manage themselves, a place they might actually belong. One night, after a particularly long lesson, Daisy asked the question they'd all been avoiding. "What happens in spring?" "When the pass is open and the court makes its ruling." The room went quiet. "Depends on the ruling," Blackthorn said. "And if it goes against us, then we appeal. Fight it through higher courts. And if that doesn't work," Blackthorn's expression was grim, "then we make harder choices." "You mean killing Gideon," Clara said flatly. "I mean doing whatever's necessary to keep you safe and free." "That's murder. That's survival. I've said it before. I'll keep saying it until you understand. We understand, Evelyn said quietly. We just don't know if we can live with it. You'll be surprised what you can live with when the alternative is losing everything that matters. The conversation died after that. But later, when they'd all retreated to their rooms, Evelyn heard soft footsteps in the hallway. She opened her door to find Wren standing there, pale and uncertain. Can't sleep? Evelyn asked. I keep thinking about what he said, about doing what's necessary. Wren's voice shook. Are we really going to kill Uncle Gideon? I don't know, Wren, but if we have to, could you do it? Evelyn looked at her youngest sister, still so innocent despite everything they'd survived, still believing the world could be good if they just tried hard enough. If it meant keeping you safe, Evelyn said slowly. Yes, I could do it. Wren's eyes filled with tears. That's horrible. I know. How can you be so calm about it? I'm not calm. I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of losing you than I am of becoming someone who kills to protect you. Evelyn pulled Wren into a hug. That's what love is sometimes. Being willing to become a monster so the people you love don't have to. Father wouldn't want that. Father's dead, and wherever he is, I'd rather face his disappointment than face a world without my sisters in it. Wren cried quietly against Evelyn's shoulder. They stood in the hallway holding each other while the house settled around them and winter wind rattled the windows. Somewhere downstairs, Blackthorn moved through the main room, checking locks and banking the fire. The ritual of a man who'd lost everything once and refused to lose anything again. And Evelyn understood finally what drove him. Not violence for its own sake, not cruelty or coldness or indifference to life. Just the desperate determination to protect the people who'd become his family, even if it destroyed him in the process. March arrived with false promises of spring. The snow began melting in earnest, revealing the valley beneath. Streams swelled with runoff. The first brave crocuses pushed through the last patches of snow. And with the thaw came the certainty that their isolation was ending. Soon the passes would open. Soon Gideon could return. Soon the court would rule on their fate. The sisters spent their days preparing, stockpiling supplies, reinforcing defenses, practicing their shooting until they could hit targets reliably. But they also spent time just living, having meals together, reading by the fire, talking late into the night, building the kind of memories that would sustain them through whatever came next. One evening, Blackthorn called them all into the main room. I need to say something, he began awkwardly. I'm not good at this. Talking about feelings, but you deserve to hear it. The sisters exchanged glances. When I bought you at that auction, I told myself I was doing a good deed, helping people who needed help. But the truth is, I needed you more than you needed me. He looked at each of them. This house has been dead for 20 years. I've been dead for 20 years, just going through motions, maintaining something that didn't matter anymore. You brought it back to life. You made it matter again. We're not your wife and daughter, Evelyn said gently. I know that. I'm not trying to replace them. But your family anyway. Different family. New family. The kind you choose instead of the kind you're born with. He cleared his throat roughly. If the court rules against us in spring, I want you to know I'll fight. Whatever it takes. Because you're not burdens. You're not property. You're people I care about. And I don't let go of people I care about. Not again. Not ever. The confession hung in the air. Then Wren started crying. She crossed the room and hugged Blackthorn fiercely. The big man went rigid with surprise, then slowly, carefully, put his arms around her. One by one, the other sisters joined in. Blackthorn stood in the center of their embrace, looking uncomfortable and overwhelmed and more vulnerable than Evelyn had ever seen him. Thank you, Daisy whispered. For what? For seeing us as human beings. That's more than most men have done. That's a pretty low bar. It's the bar we've got. They stayed like that for a long moment, 5 broken people holding on to each other in a house that had finally learned to be a home again. When they finally separated, Blackthorn looked embarrassed but lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying a weight for years and finally set it down. All right, he said gruffly. Enough of this. We've got work to do. Spring's coming, whether we're ready or not. But as they dispersed to their evening tasks, Evelyn caught his eye and smiled. He smiled back. And for the first time since the auction platform, She felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to survive what came next, together. Spring arrived with a violence that matched the winter's cold. The passes opened in late March, earlier than expected. The snow melted so fast it caused flooding in the lower valley. Streams became torrents. Roads turned to rivers of mud. And with the thaw came the certainty that their borrowed time was over. Blackthorn rode to Bitter Creek the first week of April to gather news. He returned with a face like stone. "Judge Carter's coming," he said without preamble. "Week from tomorrow, bringing the territorial ruling with him." The sisters were in the kitchen preparing dinner. Every hand stopped moving. "And?" Evelyn asked. "And nothing. My contact couldn't tell me which way it went, just that Carter's making the trip to deliver it in person." "That could be good or bad," Clara said. "It's bad," Blackthorn said flatly. "You don't travel 3 days through spring mud to deliver good news. You send a letter. Carter coming in person means he wants to see how we react. Or he wants to make sure we comply," Daisy added quietly. "Same thing." Wren set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. Her hands were shaking again, the tremor that had disappeared over winter returning with the news. "What do we do?" she whispered. "We prepare," Blackthorn said, "for every possibility." The next week moved with dreamlike slowness. They went through the motions of daily work, checking cattle, mending fences, planning the kitchen garden, but everyone's mind was elsewhere. Blackthorn became quieter, more withdrawn. He spent long hours alone on the ridge overlooking the valley, just staring at the mountains. Evelyn found him there one evening. "Planning your defense?" she asked. "Planning my offense." "There's a difference?" "Defense is reacting to what they do. Offense is making sure they can't do it." He didn't look at her. "I've been thinking about what you said, about becoming monsters to protect the people we love. And I realized I became a monster 20 years ago. I just haven't admitted it until now." Evelyn sat down beside him on the cold stone. "You're not a monster. I've killed men, Evelyn, more than I can count, during the war and after. Some deserved it. Some were just in the wrong place when I was in the wrong mood. I told myself it was survival, but that's just what monsters tell themselves to sleep at night." "You sleep at night now?" "No, but I used to." They sat in silence, watching the sun sink toward the western peaks. "If the ruling goes against us," Evelyn said carefully, "and you do what you're planning to do to Gideon, we're with you." Blackthorn turned to look at her. "What?" "We're with you. If you kill him, you don't do it alone. We help. We share the weight." "That's not your burden to carry." "Yes, it is. He's our uncle, our fight. You've done enough for us. This last part we do together or we don't do it at all." "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I've had months to think about it. Clara's had months. Daisy's had months. Even Wren." Evelyn held his gaze. "We're not children anymore. We're not victims waiting to be saved. We're people who've decided to fight for ourselves. So if it comes to it, we fight together." Blackthorn was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your father raised you to be better than this. My father raised me to survive. This is what survival looks like. It's murder. It's justice. There's a difference." "Is there?" "I don't know. But I know I'd rather live with the guilt of killing Gideon than live with the guilt of watching my sisters suffer because I was too moral to act." Blackthorn turned back to the sunset. "You sound like me. Maybe you've been a good teacher." "That's not a compliment." "It wasn't meant to be." They sat together until full dark. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to become what you hate. Judge Carter arrived exactly when promised, bringing Sheriff Hutchins and 2 clerks but no hired guns. That was either a good sign or an irrelevant one. If the ruling went against them, guns wouldn't matter. The law itself would be the weapon. They gathered in the main room of the ranch house. The sisters stood together near the fireplace. Blackthorn positioned himself between them and the door. Carter noticed the arrangement and frowned. "This isn't a trial, Mr. Blackthorn. You don't need to guard them." "Old habits." Carter opened his satchel and withdrew a thick document. "The Territorial Court has reviewed the petition regarding the guardianship and custody of Evelyn, Clara, Daisy, and Wren Mercer. I'm here to deliver their ruling." "Just deliver it," Evelyn said. "We're not interested in the preamble." Carter looked startled but nodded. Very well. The court finds that while the auction sale was legally conducted under the laws governing debt repayment, it does not constitute a valid transfer of guardianship. Mr. Gideon Pike retains legal authority over his nieces until such time as they marry or reach the age of majority, which in this territory is 21 years of age. The words hit like bullets. Evelyn felt the floor tilt beneath her. Beside her, Clara made a sound like she'd been punched. Daisy's face went white. Wren started crying silently. However, Carter continued, and something in his tone made Evelyn look up. The court also finds that Mr. Pike's conduct regarding the care and welfare of his nieces constitutes gross negligence and potential abuse. Multiple witnesses, including Mrs. Ruth Porter and Reverend Morrison of Bitter Creek, testified to his character and actions. The court has therefore suspended his guardianship pending a full investigation into allegations of mistreatment. What does that mean? Blackthorne demanded. It means Mr. Pike no longer has legal authority over these women. The court has appointed a temporary guardian until the investigation concludes and permanent arrangements can be made. Who? Evelyn asked. Carter looked directly at Blackthorne. You, Mr. Blackthorne. The court appoints you as temporary guardian with full authority to determine the sisters' living arrangements, employment, and welfare. The appointment is effective immediately and will remain in place until the investigation concludes, which could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. Silence crashed over the room. Me? Blackthorne said finally. They appointed me? Your character witnesses were compelling. Mrs. Mackey from the supply post, Mr. and Mrs. Henriksen from the neighboring ranch, Reverend Morrison. Even Sheriff Hutchins testified that the women appeared well treated and willing participants in their current arrangement. Carter allowed himself a small smile. The court decided that whatever irregularities exist in how you acquired guardianship, you've exercised it more responsibly than Mr. Pike ever did. Where's Gideon? Clara asked. What happens to him? Mr. Pike is being investigated for fraud, abuse, and illegal appropriation of property. If the allegations are substantiated, he could face criminal charges. In the meantime, he's been ordered to stay away from you and this ranch. Violation of that order will result in immediate arrest. Carter set the document on the table. You'll need to sign accepting guardianship, Mr. Blackthorne, and the sisters will need to sign consenting to the arrangement. Nobody moved. Then Evelyn stepped forward. What if we don't consent? Carter blinked. I'm sorry? What if we don't consent to any guardianship? What if we just want to be left alone? The law required our uncle to care for us, and he sold us instead. The law required men not to bid on human beings, and they did anyway. The law required justice, and we got none. Evelyn's voice was steady despite the rage burning through her. So forgive me if I don't trust what the law requires. Miss Mercer, I understand your anger, but do you? Do you understand what it's like to stand on a platform while men evaluate your body like cattle? Do you understand what it's like to be legal property with no rights and no voice? She looked at her sisters, then at Blackthorne. We've spent 9 months learning to survive without the law's protection. We've built something here, something that belongs to us. And I'm not handing control of it over to anyone, even someone we trust, just because the law says we're not capable of managing our own lives. Carter looked genuinely taken aback. What are you proposing? I'm proposing the court recognize us as independent adults capable of making our own decisions. We work for Mr. Blackthorne by choice. We live here by choice. We don't need a guardian. We need the law to leave us alone. That's not how it works. Then maybe it should be. Sheriff Hutchins cleared his throat. The girl makes a point, Judge. The law is the law, Sheriff. The law is also what we make it, and these women clearly don't need protecting from Blackthorne. Seems to me forcing guardianship on them just perpetuates the problem they're trying to escape. Carter rubbed his temples. This is highly irregular. So is selling your nieces at auction, Clara pointed out. Irregular seems to be the theme. Despite everything, Carter smiled. You're all remarkably articulate for people who supposedly need guardianship. We had good teachers, Daisy said, glancing at Blackthorne. The judge considered for a long moment. Then he said, I can't overturn the guardianship requirement. That would require legislative action beyond my authority. But I can include a recommendation in my report that the territorial legislature review the age of majority for women and consider provisions for independent status. It won't help you immediately, but it might help others. That's something, Evelyn said. In the meantime, Mr. Blackthorn's guardianship is the best protection you have. He can't control you if he chooses not to. And the document gives you legal standing to remain here without interference from Mr. Pike or anyone else. Carter looked at Blackthorn. Will you accept the appointment? Blackthorn met Evelyn's eyes. She saw the question there. Did she trust him with this power? She nodded. I'll accept, Blackthorn said, on condition that it's guardianship in name only. These women make their own choices. I just provide the legal authority they need to enforce those choices. That's acceptable. Carter produced a pen. Then let's make it official. They signed the documents one by one. Evelyn watched her own hand form the letters of her name and felt disconnected from it, like watching someone else write her future. When it was done, Carter gathered his papers. There's one more thing. Mr. Pike made threats when the ruling was announced. Nothing specific, but Sheriff Hutchins thought you should be aware. What kind of threats? Blackthorn asked. The usual. That he'd get justice one way or another. That the law couldn't protect you forever. That blood would have blood. Hutchins looked uncomfortable. I warned him that any action against you or the sisters would result in arrest, but men like Pike don't always listen to warnings. Noted, Blackthorn said. After the judge and sheriff left, the five of them stood in the main room in stunned silence. We won, Wren said finally. Didn't we? We survived, Evelyn corrected. That's not the same as winning. But Gideon can't take us back. Not legally. That doesn't mean he won't try. Clara sank into a chair. This is insane. We're still property, just Blackthorn's property instead of Gideon's. It's not like that, Blackthorn said. Isn't it? You're our legal guardian. You control where we live, what we do, who we see. The only difference between you and Gideon is you're choosing not to exercise that control. But you could, anytime you wanted. I won't. You say that now, but power corrupts. Everyone knows that. Clara, Daisy said softly, stop. Why? Because it's uncomfortable? Because it's true? Because you're angry at the law and taking it out on the one person who's helped us. Daisy looked at Blackthorn. He didn't ask for this. He accepted it to protect us. That's what he says. That's what I know. Daisy's voice was firm. I've watched him for 9 months. I've seen how he treats us. He's not Gideon. He's not any of the men who bid on us. He's someone who lost everything and decided to help us anyway. So yes, legally, he's our guardian, but really, he's family, and families trust each other. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I want to trust him. I do. But I'm scared. I'm so tired of being scared. Blackthorn crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, making himself smaller, less intimidating. I can't make you not scared. I can't fix what the law did to you, but I can promise you this. I will never use that guardianship to control you, never to hurt you, never to take away the choices you've earned. You have my word. Words are just air. Then watch my actions. Judge me by what I do, not what I say. Clara wiped her eyes. And if you break that promise, then you leave, all of you. I'll give you money, horses, supplies, and directions to somewhere safe. You'll never see me again. Just like that? Just like that? Clara searched his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, I'll trust you, for now. It wasn't complete faith, but it was enough. That night, they had the closest thing to a celebration the ranch had ever seen. Daisy made a special dinner with the last of the preserved meat. Wren decorated the table with wildflowers from the valley. Clara opened a bottle of whiskey she'd found in Blackthorn's study and poured everyone a small glass. To survival, Evelyn said, raising her glass. To family, Daisy added. To freedom, Clara said, however imperfect. To home, Wren whispered. They all looked at Blackthorn. To second chances, he said quietly, and the people brave enough to take them. They drank. The whiskey burned going down, but it was a good burn, a living burn. Proof they'd made it through the winter and the legal battle and the constant fear. After dinner, they sat around the fire talking late into the night. Not about courts or guardianship or Gideon's threats. Just talking. About books Clara wanted to read. About medicines Daisy wanted to try making. about paintings Wren wanted to create, about the cattle operation Evelyn wanted to expand, about the future, for the first time in months, like it might actually exist. Around midnight, Blackthorn stood. "I'm checking the perimeter before bed." "Want company?" Evelyn asked. "Always." They walked the ranch yard together, checking locks and listening to the night sounds. The air smelled like earth and new growth. Spring was fully here now, transforming the valley from white to green. "You think he'll come?" Evelyn asked. "Gideon? Yeah, he'll come." "When?" "Soon. He's lost everything. His nieces, his reputation, possibly his freedom if the investigation goes against him. Men like that don't fade away quietly. They lash out." "We'll be ready. Will you?" Blackthorn stopped walking and turned to face her. "Because ready means accepting you might have to kill someone. Not talking about it theoretically, but actually doing it. Pulling a trigger. Watching someone die. Living with that forever." "I know what it means." "Do you?" "Because there's a difference between understanding something and experiencing it. And once you cross that line, you can't uncross it. You become someone different. I became someone different the day my father died. And again when Gideon sold us. And again every day I've survived something that should have broken me." Evelyn met his eyes. "I'm not who I was 9 months ago. I'm not even who I was 9 weeks ago. I'm whoever I need to be to protect my sisters. If that means becoming a killer, then that's who I'll be." "That's a hard road." "Every road is hard. At least this one I'm choosing." Blackthorn studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, then we prepare together, all of us. Because if Gideon comes, he won't come alone." They spent the next week turning the ranch into a fortress. Blackthorn taught them defensive positions, sight lines, how to set up crossfire. They stockpiled ammunition and medical supplies. They established fallback points and emergency signals. "This is insane," Clara said after a particularly intense training session. "We're preparing for war." "We're preparing to survive war," Blackthorn corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. One means you're looking for a fight. The other means you're ready when the fight finds you." The fight found them on a Tuesday. Evelyn was in the barn when she heard the gunshot. Not close, but not far either. A signal shot, she realized. A warning. She grabbed her rifle and ran for the house. Blackthorn was already on the porch, scanning the tree line. The other sisters emerged from various buildings, weapons in hand. "How many?" Evelyn called. "Don't know yet, but that shot came from the East Ridge. Someone's announcing themselves." "Gideon?" "Probably." They waited. The valley was silent except for wind through the pines and the nervous shifting of horses in the corral. Then riders emerged from the tree line. 6 of them. Gideon in the lead, flanked by the same hired guns from before, plus 2 new faces. They rode slowly down toward the ranch, making no effort to hide their approach. Blackthorn chambered around. "Get inside. Defensive positions." "No," Evelyn said. "What?" "No. We don't hide. We face this together." She looked at her sisters. They looked terrified but determined. "Right?" "Right," Clara said. "Together," Daisy agreed. Wren just nodded, too scared to speak but standing firm anyway. The sisters spread out across the porch, weapons ready. Blackthorn positioned himself at the center, a living wall between them and whoever came. Gideon reined in his horse 20 feet from the house. His face was different than Evelyn remembered, harder, meaner, with the desperate look of someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "Well," he said pleasantly, "isn't this domestic?" "You're violating the court order," Blackthorn said. "Turn around and leave." "Or what? You'll shoot me? In front of the sheriff's men?" Gideon gestured to 2 of the riders. "That's right. I brought witnesses, deputized citizens, observing whether you're complying with the guardianship terms. Can't be too careful with men who kidnap women." "We're not kidnapped," Evelyn said. "We're exactly where we choose to be. Under duress, under threat, under the influence of a man who's manipulated you." Gideon's smile widened. "I'm here to rescue you girls. Take you somewhere safe, somewhere you can recover from your trauma." "The only trauma we have is from you," Clara spat. "That's the manipulation talking. Don't worry, we'll fix that." One of the hired guns shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his weapon. Blackthorn's rifle came up instantly, aimed directly at the man's chest. "Next person who reaches for a gun dies," Blackthorn said calmly. "I don't care if you're deputized or ordained, or the president himself. You reach, you die." The hired gun froze. Gideon laughed. "There it is. The violence, the threat. Exactly what I knew we'd find. These women are terrified of you, Blackthorn. They're just too broken to admit it." "We're not broken," Daisy said. Her voice was soft but clear. "We were broken. You broke us. But we healed. We built something new. And we're not letting you destroy it." Sweet Daisy, always so naive, always thinking kindness matters. Gideon's expression darkened. "You really think this ends well for you? You really think the law will let 4 women and 1 violent man play house in the mountains? This is temporary. The investigation will clear me. I've got enough money to make sure of that. And when it does, I'll have full guardianship restored, and then we'll see how brave you all are." "You're lying," Clara said. "The witnesses can be discredited, bribed, scared into changing their stories. Money buys a lot of things, including justice." He leaned forward in his saddle. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with me now, peacefully, and we'll tell the court you requested the transfer. Blackthorn gets compensated for his trouble. Everyone goes home happy." "And if we refuse?" Evelyn asked. "Then I take you by force. These men are deputized. They have legal authority to enforce guardianship transfers. Blackthorn resists, he gets arrested or shot. Probably shot, given his reputation. Then you come with me anyway, but traumatized by watching your protector die." The threat hung in the air like poison. Evelyn looked at her sisters, saw the fear in their eyes, but also the determination. They'd come too far to surrender now. She looked at Blackthorn, saw the calculation in his face, the weighing of odds, the acceptance of what might be necessary. And she made her choice. "No," Evelyn said. "What?" "No, we're not going with you, not peacefully, not by force, not ever." She stepped forward, rifle steady in her hands. "You sold us, Gideon. You gave up every right to call us family. And now you're trying to take back what you threw away because you can't stand that we're happy without you. You're not happy. You're deluded. We're free. Maybe for the first time in our lives. And we're not giving that up. You don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Even us. Even now." Evelyn looked at the deputized men. "You want to force us? Try. But know that we'll fight. All of us. And some of you will die trying to take us. Maybe all of you. Is that worth whatever Gideon's paying you?" The hired guns exchanged glances. One of them shifted uncomfortably. "She's bluffing," Gideon said. "Women don't shoot men. They don't have the spine for it." "You want to bet your life on that?" Evelyn asked. "Because I've already decided I'd rather die than go back to being your property. And if I'm dying anyway, I'm taking you with me." She wasn't bluffing. Gideon saw it in her eyes. "You've turned them into killers," he said to Blackthorn. "Into monsters." "No," Blackthorn replied. "You did that when you sold them. I just taught them how to survive what you made them." The standoff stretched. 6 armed men on horseback versus 4 women and 1 man on a porch. The math should have been simple, but math didn't account for desperation, or determination, or the willingness to die for something that mattered. Finally, one of the deputized men spoke up. "Pike, this ain't worth it. These women clearly don't want to go. We try to force them. People die. That ain't what I signed up for." "You signed up for whatever I'm paying you for," Gideon snarled. "You ain't paying me enough to get shot by a woman who means it." Another man nodded. "He's right. This is your fight, Pike, not ours." One by one, the hired men turned their horses and rode away. Even the 2 deputies, after a moment's hesitation, followed. Gideon was left alone, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Blackthorn replied. "It's been over since the moment you sold them. You just haven't accepted it yet." "I'll find a way. I'll appeal the ruling, bribe judges, whatever it takes. You can't protect them forever." "I don't need forever. I just need long enough for them to protect themselves." Gideon looked at the sisters one more time. Evelyn saw something crack in his expression, the final acceptance that he'd lost. "You're not my family anymore," he said bitterly. "We never were," Clara replied. "Family doesn't sell family." Gideon yanked his horse around and rode off, alone, defeated, broken. They watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Then, finally, the sisters lowered their weapons. Wren started crying first, then Daisy, then even Clara, who never cried. They held each other on the porch, shaking with relief and residual fear, and the knowledge of how close they'd come to losing everything. Blackthorn stood apart, giving them space, but Evelyn pulled him into the embrace. "Your family too," she said, "whether you like it or not." "I like it," he said quietly. "I just don't deserve it." "None of us deserve what we get. We just decide what to do with it." They stood together as the sun sank toward the western peaks. 5 people who'd been broken in different ways and somehow, impossibly, found a way to heal together. The investigation cleared 3 months later. Gideon was found guilty of fraud and abuse. He lost his remaining property and was banned from the territory. Rumor said he headed east, back to whatever hole he'd crawled out of originally. The sisters never saw him again. Blackthorn's guardianship became permanent, but it remained exactly what he'd promised: authority in name only. The sisters made their own choices, lived their own lives, built their own futures. Clara opened a school in the ranch's renovated bunkhouse. Children from neighboring ranches came twice a week for lessons. She taught reading, writing, mathematics, history, everything she'd learned and everything she wished she'd been taught. The school became known throughout the valley, and Clara became known as the woman who proved that learning didn't require formal credentials, just dedication and intelligence. Daisy's healing practice expanded. Ranchers and their families sought her out for everything from broken bones to difficult births. She studied constantly, learning new techniques from medical journals Blackthorn ordered from back east. Eventually, she became the closest thing the valley had to a doctor. People paid her in goods and labor, and she never turned anyone away for lack of money. Wren's paintings brought color to a gray frontier. She sold them through a general store in Bitter Creek, and they ended up in homes across the territory. Her scenes of mountain valleys and frontier life captured something essential about the West: its brutality and beauty existing side by side. She painted because she loved it, but the money she earned gave her an independence she'd never imagined possible. Evelyn learned the cattle business until she knew it better than Blackthorn himself. She negotiated sales, managed the herd, planned expansion. Within 2 years, the ranch's profits had doubled. Within 5, they'd tripled. She became known as a shrewd businesswoman, someone ranchers respected and competitors feared. She never married, never felt the need to. The ranch was her family, and that was enough. Blackthorn remained Blackthorn, gruff, quiet, carrying his grief like an old coat he couldn't quite discard. But he smiled more, talked more, seemed less like a ghost and more like a man who'd finally figured out how to live again. He taught the sisters everything he knew, treating them as partners rather than dependents. And slowly, without anyone quite noticing when it happened, the ranch stopped being Blackthorn's ranch and became simply home. 10 years after the auction, Evelyn stood on the same ridge where she'd once watched Gideon's riders approach. The valley spread out below her, green and gold in the summer sun. The ranch buildings looked different now, expanded, improved, lived in. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse school. Children's laughter carried on the wind. Blackthorn joined her, moving more slowly than he used to, but still solid as the mountains themselves. "Thinking?" he asked. "Remembering. That day we arrived. How terrified I was. How certain I was that we'd end up dead or worse. You weren't wrong to be scared. No, but I was wrong to think fear meant we couldn't survive." She looked at him. "You saved us, you know. Not from Gideon. From giving up. You saved yourselves. I just provided the space for it. That's more than most people get." They stood together watching the valley. 2 survivors who'd learned that family wasn't about blood or law or obligation. It was about choosing to show up for each other, day after day, through seasons of terror and seasons of peace. Below them, Clara rang the school bell, calling students to afternoon lessons. Daisy emerged from her clinic, washing her hands after treating a rancher's injured son. Wren sat on the porch painting, her latest canvas catching the light. "They're going to be all right," Blackthorn said. "Even after I'm gone." You're not going anywhere. Everyone goes somewhere eventually. But yeah, I've got a few years left. Enough to see Clara married if she ever stops being too particular. Enough to see Daisy's clinic built proper instead of working out of a shed. Enough to watch Wren's paintings hang in galleries back east. What about Evelyn? Evelyn doesn't need me to see her future. She's already living it. It was true. Evelyn had built a life she could never have imagined on that auction platform. Not perfect, not without scars, but hers in a way nothing had ever been before. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing us as human beings when the rest of the world saw property. For teaching us to fight. For giving us space to heal. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Because you didn't have to do any of it. You chose to, and that choice saved our lives. Blackthorn was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My wife would have liked you, all of you. She believed people could heal if given the chance. I stopped believing that after she died. You proved I was wrong. We didn't heal. We just learned to live with the damage. Same thing, in the end. They walked back down to the ranch together, an odd pair, the scarred giant and the woman who'd refused to stay broken. Behind them, the sun painted the mountains gold. Ahead, smoke rose from the chimney and voices drifted through open windows, and life continued in all its messy, beautiful, imperfect glory. That night, the five of them gathered around the dinner table like they had every night for 10 years. The conversation flowed easily. Talk of students and patients and paintings and cattle prices and 100 mundane details that added up to a life worth living. And if someone had looked through the window at that moment, they wouldn't have seen victims or property or damaged people pretending to be whole. They would have seen a family. Unconventional, certainly. Forged in crisis rather than born into. But family nonetheless. Because family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up when you're standing on an auction platform being sold like cattle and say, I'll buy all four together because nobody deserves to lose their family twice. It's about the people who teach you to survive when survival seems impossible. It's about the people who see you as human when the world sees you as property. It's about choosing, every single day, to fight for each other instead of surrendering to what life tries to make you. The sisters had learned that lesson the hard way, but they'd learned it completely, and they'd built something that no court, no law, no cruel uncle could ever take away. They'd built a home, not perfect, not painless, but theirs. And that was enough.